Hey guys, welcome back to the Red Bed. Today I've got over 3 hours of real life Reddit stories. Perfect for falling asleep, relaxing, or just having something on in the background. And while you listen, I'll be sharing some chill, hardcore gameplay I got today, where I spend most of the time getting more progress done on my base. Also, I try to post these videos every night, so whenever you need something to relax or fall asleep to, feel free to come back to the channel. But anyways, kick back, relax, and enjoy. This first story is about an IT worker who got a support call from a client saying her computer was haunted, and after a long round of troubleshooting, the real cause turned out to be much funnier. I work for an association that provides software and IT support to a few thousand clients. Basically, if their systems act up, they call me. Most days are filled with the usual, helping people reset passwords, walking them through software updates, or fixing issues that could have been solved with a quick reboot. But every so often, I get a call that's so ridiculous, it sticks in my memory forever. This one started innocently enough. The phone rang, I picked up, and a woman with a very polite, calm voice greeted me. "My computer is broken," she said, very matter of fact. That was it. No further explanation. Just those 4 words. I tried to get more details. "All right, can you tell me what's happening?" I asked. She paused for a moment before repeating, "It's broken." At that point, I realized this was going to be one of those calls where I'd need to drag every piece of information out of her. So I started asking specific questions. Was it turning on? Was she seeing error messages? What exactly was happening on her screen? After a few minutes of back and forth, I finally pieced together what she meant by broken. According to her, the keyboard was typing on its own. Letters were appearing on the screen like some invisible hand was pressing the keys. In her words, "It's like someone else is holding the keys down." I'll admit, that caught my attention. Phantom keystrokes can be caused by a few things. Hardware issues, a stuck key, maybe even a weird Bluetooth conflict. But in the moment, it sounded almost spooky, like she was describing a ghost in her machine. We were about 5 minutes into the call already, and I still had no idea what the actual cause was. So I started with the basics. I asked if she had another keyboard connected by Bluetooth or plugged in somewhere. Maybe she had an old wireless keyboard still paired, and a cat was sitting on it across the room. She sounded almost offended. "Nope," she said quickly, like I'd asked something silly. "All right, fair enough." I moved on. I asked if she'd spilled anything on the keyboard recently. A sticky key could easily cause a letter to repeat endlessly. I told her to press down on the key that was showing up on the screen and see if it felt strange, like if it was sticking, clicking weirdly, or not springing back. There was a pause on the line. A long pause. Finally, she said, "Okay, 1 second. I have to take all this paperwork and files off my desk first. It's completely burying my keyboard right now." And that's when it all clicked. The entire mystery, the so-called ghost typing, wasn't some strange computer glitch at all. It wasn't a virus, it wasn't a Bluetooth issue, and it definitely wasn't a ghost. The poor keyboard was literally buried under stacks of papers and files. The weight of everything piled on top of it was pressing down the keys. I had to mute myself for a second to keep from laughing out loud. After nearly 10 minutes of careful troubleshooting, the big reveal was that she had so much clutter on her desk that her computer thought someone was typing. I unmuted myself and explained gently what was happening. She sounded a little embarrassed, but mostly relieved. She brushed off the papers, straightened her desk, and sure enough, the ghost typing stopped immediately. Problem solved. What stuck with me wasn't just the silly cause of the issue, but how calm she had been the whole time. She never once sounded panicked or flustered. To her, this was simply, "My computer is broken," and she had no idea why. Meanwhile, I was on the other end walking her through scenarios like sticky keys, Bluetooth interference, or liquid damage, when all along the culprit was a mountain of paperwork crushing the poor keyboard. By the end of the call, she thanked me for helping her figure it out. I told her it was no problem and reminded her to keep her desk a little clearer in the future. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair and laughed. Because honestly, I couldn't make up a story like that if I tried. That's where this story ends. This one was hilarious because it built up like a mystery. Phantom keystrokes, ghost typing, maybe even a haunted computer. And then the punchline was just a desk piled so high with paperwork that it flattened the keys. Easily one of those support calls you never forget. This next story is about an employee who kept getting brushed off with empty promises about a long-awaited raise. until they finally decided to push back in a big way. I used to work for an Eastern Canadian telecom company back in the early 2000s, the kind of place where you learn to move fast and keep your head down. That year, the company merged with a Western Canadian telecom, and by December, the corporate office announced a raise for service reps, up to $3.50 an hour. It was framed as a retention move to keep Eastern employees from joining the union in the West. The memo said the raises would be administered by area managers starting in January. Our area manager covered 7 or 8 stores, so I figured it would take a while to roll out. January passed, then February. I remember catching him in the break room and asking, "When do we get the raise?" He'd flash that easy smile and say, "Soon." At first I accepted it. I asked again in March and April. Each time, "Soon." The words started to sound like a script. It was always delivered with the same casual shrug, like time was something he could ration. Word got around that other areas had already received raises in February and March, retroactive to January. I called a few stores in neighboring territories just to check. They confirmed their people had received the raise. That's when the pattern became hard to ignore. Our area manager was the outlier. When raises are paid retroactively, delaying distribution is one way to boost quarterly numbers and potentially inflate a manager's bonus. It felt like he was quietly siphoning payroll into his quarterly results. I kept a record. I'm the kind of person who notices dates and small details. I write things down. I documented when I'd asked and what he'd said each time. By May, after months of soon, my patience shifted into planning. I composed a detailed, strongly worded 4-page letter that laid out the full timeline. The corporate announcement, the promise of raises effective January, the fact other territories had already been paid in February and March, and the dates I had personally asked and been told soon. I explained how the delay affected staff morale and how wages owed retroactively were effectively being withheld by the slow rollout. I didn't send it immediately. I held the draft and watched. Timing mattered to me. If I blasted the letter at a busy moment, it might have been buried, or he might have had time to spin a narrative. The May long weekend offered a window. That Friday morning, he came in talking about his plans to drive up to his Muskoka cottage. He loved to mention that place, talk about the shoreline, the boat, the quiet he'd be enjoying. He said they planned to arrive mid-afternoon. He sounded pleased with himself. I waited until later that day, around 4 p.m., with fewer people around and his schedule effectively cleared. I opened my work email and sent the letter directly to the president and the CEO. Hitting send felt heavy. A punch of nerves and an immediate hollow relief followed, like dropping a stone into a pond and waiting to see the ripples. I knew it could blow up in my face, but I also believed truth mattered. Documentation was on my side. The facts were clear. When I arrived at work Saturday morning at 7 a.m., the parking lot felt like its own theater. The air was crisp and everything seemed sharper. The hum of the fluorescent lights inside, the distant sound of a delivery truck, as if the world had edged forward after I'd nudged it. He pulled in a few minutes later and asked to speak with me outside. He looked drained, like the color had gone from his face. In the parking lot, he told me the company had contacted him and asked him to come back to Toronto to talk. He apologized and said the raises would be applied retroactively to January 1st and that everyone at my store would receive the maximum raise. I remember the words landed oddly, equal parts vindication and disbelief. After months of being brushed off, it felt almost unreal that corporate had acted so swiftly. He tried to explain that there had been administrative holdups, that numbers were complicated, and that he would have preferred I speak to him first. His voice had a brittle edge that betrayed the defensiveness. I didn't shout, I didn't gloat, I stayed measured. I told him I'd asked multiple times and that my notes matched the timeline in the letter. I offered to forward the email so he could see the record for himself. He shook his head and muttered something about how he'd been forced to return to the office. He said I'd ruined his weekend. I told him that if delaying raises had padded his quarterly numbers, then losing that padding seemed like a fair cost. That made him look away. After the meeting, the office slowly filled with normal noise again, but there was a different undercurrent. People talking softer, smiling more. The calls started coming in over the next week. Coworkers in other stores thanking me. One tech from a neighboring area who suspected something, saying he'd been thinking of bringing it up for months, but didn't. A couple of managers called privately to say they appreciated the escalation because it exposed a pattern they couldn't touch. It wasn't a parade. Mostly it was quiet relief and small practical changes. Payroll corrected, people able to cover bills they've been juggling. Those are ordinary but real effects. I stayed at that job for another 6 to 8 months before moving on to the next chapter of my career. For that period, payroll was corrected and people noticed. Small things matter when wages are involved. A grocery list stretched further, a bill paid on time. The area manager's weekend was ruined. I'll be honest, that was satisfying. But the more important thing was that people eventually got what they were owed. Looking back, sending that letter was a deliberate escalation, not an emotional outburst. I had patience, I collected evidence, and I timed my move. It wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. It was a way to make the issue visible and force a remedy when polite requests failed. I don't regret it. I learned that systems can be gamed, and sometimes you have to use the same tools to get fairness back. There's a small, private pleasure in seeing a greedy shortcut get corrected, and that moment of quiet satisfaction stuck with me. That's where the story ends. The manager's downfall came entirely from his own arrogance. By brushing off every question with the same empty promise, he dug a deeper hole for himself until there was no way out. The timing of the email was brutal, but brilliant, turning his long weekend getaway into a drive back to face the mess he'd created. In the end, the raise still went through, and everyone else gained, while he lost the bonus he thought he was protecting. This next story is about someone dealing with a friend who always flaunted his intelligence, and finally turning the tables on him with nothing more than an apple. I've got this friend who is, without a doubt, really smart. He grew up in different countries, speaks multiple languages, and is into linguistics, philosophy, and poetry. On paper, that all sounds great. And honestly, a lot of the time it is interesting to talk to him. But here's the catch. He has this streak of arrogance. Instead of sharing knowledge in a way that lifts people up, he uses it to make them feel dumb. It's not just, oh hey, actually it's this, in a polite way. It's more like, wow, you didn't know that, with a tone that drips with superiority. So one time a group of us were traveling together. We hadn't all hung out in a while, and the idea was to explore a new city and just enjoy ourselves. At first it was fun, but as the trip went on, his arrogance crept in, little corrections here, smug comments there, and it started to sour things. One morning, we were all having breakfast at our lodging. I grabbed an apple, took a few bites, and ate it like any normal person would, leaving the core behind. That's when he looked at me and asked, "Why didn't you eat the whole thing?" The tone wasn't curious. It was the same patronizing one he always used, as if not eating an apple core was some huge character flaw. Normally, I would have brushed it off or tried to explain. My reasoning is simple. I don't like chewing the hard bits of the core and the seeds. With pears, I'll eat them whole, but apples are different. It's just personal preference. But I knew if I tried to explain all of that, it would just give him more ammunition to lecture me and make me feel stupid. So instead, I decided to flip the script. I looked him dead in the eye and said, it's the cyanide in the seeds. Now, I knew full well that eating one apple core wasn't going to hurt anyone. You'd have to eat a ridiculous number of apple seeds before it became dangerous. But the second the words left my mouth, I could see the spark in his eyes. He was so ready to pounce. He was practically loading up his, speech in his head, probably already planning to launch into a 5-minute monologue about botany and how the human body processes cyanide. But before he could fire off, I cut him off with a smirk and said, "Bro, you know I'm just kidding, right?" And that was it. He froze. For once, I had beat him at his own game. His face was priceless. This mix of surprise and irritation, like I had pulled the rug out from under him. He had been gearing up for one of his classic lectures, only to find himself completely disarmed. Was it petty? Absolutely. Did it change who he was? Not at all. He still had plenty of arrogant moments throughout that trip, but that one win was enough to carry me through. For once, I felt like I had shut down the constant corrections and proved that I wasn't just a target for his smarter-than-you routine, and honestly, it felt good. Really good. That's where this story ends. This one's a small but satisfying win. Sometimes the best way to handle someone's arrogance isn't with a serious debate, but with a quick little curveball that throws them off completely. And doing it with something as ordinary as an apple makes it even better. This next story is about someone who had to deal with their ex-mother-in-law showing up uninvited and ended up embarrassing her in the best way possible. My ex-husband and I have a pretty unusual setup. Even though we've been separated for a while and have no plans of ever getting back together, we still share a roof. We live in a small 2-bedroom house, and honestly, it's not the worst arrangement. We get along well enough to make it work. The key is boundaries. I've got my room, he's got his, and that's that. The problem started when his mother decided to drop by without warning. Now, to be clear, we've told her multiple times that our place is too small for visitors, and yet there she was at our front door with bags in hand. I wasn't about to give up my room, and my ex wasn't giving up his either, so she ended up on the couch. She was clearly unhappy about it, but that was her problem, not mine. For a little context, I've never had a good relationship with her. We tolerated each other at best during the 20+ years I was married to her son. It wasn't an explosive kind of dislike, just a simmering one. I couldn't stand how she treated him, ignoring him for years, then popping back into his life whenever she wanted something, expecting him to jump and cater to her. She disappeared twice during his life, once for 5 years and another time for more than 10. And still, when she resurfaced, she acted like she deserved full attention, no questions asked. So during this visit, I was just minding my own business one evening, scrolling through my phone. I was checking out an adult toy website, nothing I was trying to hide. I wasn't making it a secret. She happened to walk past me at just the wrong moment and caught a glimpse of what was on my screen. She immediately stopped in her tracks, leaned over, and practically shouted, "What on earth are you looking at? Insert my name." The look on her face was priceless, like she'd just caught me committing a crime. Without missing a beat, I shot back, "It's an adult toy website. Want to check out some toys?" And I held my phone out toward her as if I was about to hand it over. The way she jumped back was absolutely beautiful. This woman, who had always carried herself with this self-righteous, judgmental attitude, looked like she'd touched a live wire. Her reaction was so exaggerated that it almost felt like something out of a sitcom. She wanted no part of that phone, that website, or that conversation. And just like that, she shut down. For the rest of her stay, she completely ignored me. Not a word, not a glance, nothing. Honestly, it was the quietest and most peaceful visit I've ever had with her under the same roof. That story wraps up here. The funniest part about this one is how fast the energy flipped. She stormed in ready to be critical, but one unexpected comeback left her speechless. After decades of tolerating her attitude, that one moment of embarrassment did all the work. Sometimes silence really is the sweetest outcome. This next story is about a sister-in-law who kept getting pushed with rude questions about having more kids, until she shut it all down with one brutally honest comeback. My sister-in-law went through something incredibly difficult when she gave birth to my nephew. It wasn't just a tough delivery, it was life-threatening. Her uterus tore during labor, and though the doctor tried to stitch it up, the bleeding wouldn't stop. Hours later, things escalated into massive internal bleeding. For a while, we almost lost her. To say it was traumatic for her is an understatement. It left scars, not just physical but emotional, and it changed the way she viewed pregnancy and childbirth forever. By the time of this story, my nephew was around 4 or 5 years old. I don't remember the exact year, but he's almost a teenager now. What I do remember clearly is that this moment happened at one of our big family gatherings. And when I say big, I mean huge. My mom has 8 siblings, my dad has 10. And when you add in all the cousins, their spouses, and their kids, the house fills up quickly. Easily 60 or more people under one roof. The kind of gathering where every room has chatter, laughter, and people swapping stories. During this particular gathering, one of my cousins was pregnant with her first child. She was glowing with happiness, very bubbly, and full of excitement about the future. Naturally, she gravitated toward my sister-in-law, since they could bond over pregnancy and motherhood. They started chatting about cravings, swollen feet, baby clothes, all the usual lighthearted topics that come up when someone's expecting. At first, I just sat nearby, munching on food and listening in. I wasn't part of the conversation since I was in my early 20s, still studying abroad for my master's degree, and kids weren't anywhere on my radar. It felt like a separate world, but I enjoyed listening to their stories. The tone shifted when my cousin asked about childbirth. My sister-in-law kept things vague, mentioning it had been traumatic for her, but quickly reassured my cousin that what happened to her was uncommon and not something most people would need to worry about. She kept her tone gentle, encouraging, not wanting to dampen the excitement. Then came the question that changed everything. Do you plan on a second child? My cousin said it casually, adding that she herself wanted 3 because she loved kids so much. My sister-in-law smiled politely and said that 1 was enough for her. She immediately tried to steer the topic back toward my cousin, maybe to talk about baby clothes or diapers, just something light again. But my cousin didn't let it go. She pushed harder, saying, "Don't you want another one? It would be good to give your son a sibling, and it would make another grandchild for your parents and in-laws." Then, with a little chuckle, she even threw me into it. As for OP, she's forever in school. Who knows how long before she even gets married? That comment annoyed me, honestly. I wasn't even part of the conversation. I was in my 20s, focusing on my education, working hard on my degree abroad. Prioritizing school was the right thing for me at that age, and it felt unnecessary for her to make a joke out of it. Still, I didn't say anything. I just smiled, kept munching, and let it slide. My sister-in-law, though, tried once again to deflect and steer the conversation back to the pregnancy. But my cousin doubled down. She pointed out that my sister-in-law was a stay-at-home mom, saying that with her son going into kindergarten soon, she wasn't doing much at home, and that it seemed like the perfect time for a second child. That one hit a nerve for me because I knew it wasn't true at all. My sister-in-law had recently launched an interior design and renovation business with my brother. They're both architects, and she was pouring so much time and energy into building that work. She was busy. The pushing didn't stop though. My cousin kept circling back, asking the same question in different ways, as if my sister-in-law's polite no wasn't good enough. For a while, my SL just kept smiling and deflecting, keeping the conversation light. But eventually, she cracked. Still smiling, still with that bubbly tone, she finally said, "Okay, I can't have a second kid." Then, without changing her cheerful delivery, she launched into the raw, brutal truth of what had happened to her during childbirth. She described the birth in detail. She explained the recovery, how she had gone through a natural birth only to end up with an abdominal surgery right after. She talked about how her body felt destroyed. She didn't hold back. It was graphic, vivid, and honest. But she delivered every word with a cheerful tone, as if she were still discussing diaper brands. The contrast between her bubbly voice and the horrifying details made the moment even more intense. My cousin, who had been pushing and pushing, went dead silent. She shut her mouth, turned back to her plate, and started eating in an awkward quiet. Conversation over. After that, my sister-in-law turned to me with the same big smile, completely unbothered, and asked, "So, how's school going?" That's where the story ends. This comeback was perfect because it matched the cousin's energy in the most unexpected way. When polite answers didn't work, the raw truth did. It's one of those moments where you can feel the entire room shift, from someone pushing too far to them instantly regretting it. This next story is about someone who ended up in the hospital after a simple evening nap following antibiotics went horribly wrong, and learned a painful lesson about how medicine and posture don't always mix. I've been fighting off a mild lung infection for a few days, the kind that isn't serious enough for a hospital stay, but still makes everything feel like a slog. My doctor had given me a week-long course of antibiotics to knock it out. It was a routine plan. Take the pills, rest, hydrate, repeat. The funny thing is, my cat seemed more concerned about me than I was about myself. He'd been extra clingy, nipping gently at my hands, licking my face, curling around my legs as if to herd me toward the couch, almost like a furry little nurse insisting I take it easy. Yesterday evening, after taking my dose, I gave in to him. I lay down on the couch, pulled a throw blanket over myself, and let him curl up on my stomach. It was warm, quiet, and strangely comforting. The steady weight of him purring felt like a living heating pad. Before I knew it, we both drifted off into a nap. When I woke up a few hours later, it was dark. The television was playing some muted late-night rerun. My cat was still snuggled up, and I felt stiff but not alarmed. It was time for bed anyway, so I slowly sat up. That's when I noticed my back hurt. At first I shrugged it off. Couches aren't exactly ergonomic, and I'd been in the same position for a while. But as I climbed the stairs to the bedroom, something felt off. By the time I reached the top, the discomfort had turned into full-on pain radiating through my chest, my back, and my stomach. It felt like my whole torso had been punched from the inside. I took some over-the-counter medicine, hoping it would settle. I even told my husband to go ahead and sleep, promising I'd come up once I felt better. But better never came. Instead, I got worse. The pain climbed from a dull throb to something sharp and unrelenting. I was restless, tossing from side to side on the couch like a fish out of water, trying to find a position that hurt less. By 1 o'clock in the morning, I was doubled over, realizing this wasn't just going to pass on its own. I called the emergency health line, explaining my symptoms through gritted teeth. The triage nurse didn't mince words. "Bad chest pain is dangerous," she said. "Go to a hospital right now." Paraphrased, but clear enough to jolt me into action. I woke my husband, got dressed as best I could, and by 2 a.m. we were in the emergency room. By then, my pain level was hovering around 8 or 9 out of 10, and I could barely string together a sentence. They gave me an IV, but no pain medication yet. That alone was a fresh sting. I've had needles before, but this one burned going in and throbbed after. The hospital was clearly short-staffed, and the waiting room looked like a scene from a disaster movie. Nurses darted from patient to patient, frazzled and apologetic. I waited and waited. Hours blurred together. My husband sat beside me while I drifted in and out of a haze, clutching my chest and stomach, trying not to cry in public. It was 9 a.m. by the time I finally saw a doctor. By then, I'd been awake for more than 24 hours, with 10 of those spent in severe pain. I was barely coherent, words coming out in broken fragments. The doctor listened to my story, pressing his fingers against my abdomen with practiced jabs that made me wince. Then he gave me an answer so simple and frustrating that I almost laughed. "You can't lay down after you take antibiotics," he said matter-of-factly. "That's how you damage your stomach lining and esophagus with stomach acid." All those hours of pain, all that panic, because I'd taken my medication and then reclined like it was no big deal. They finally gave me pain relief. The rush of relief was so strong I almost cried again, but this time from gratitude. After they removed the IV, which hurt worse than putting it in, I could finally go home. We got back around 11 a.m. I dropped onto the bed fully clothed, too exhausted to change, and passed out. When I woke up later, I felt like a zombie. Groggy, sore, but at least not in that searing pain anymore. The one small bright side? In the middle of all that testing, they confirmed my heart was in A+ condition. Not exactly the reassurance I've been looking for, but I'll take it. That's where the story ends. It's wild how something that seems harmless, like lying down after taking a pill, can snowball into a full-blown emergency. This story also shows how long and draining a night at the hospital can be when you're in pain and waiting for answers. That tiny note about the cat being like a furry nurse cracked a little smile, though. Small comforts matter when everything else is chaos. This next story is about a fashion designer whose younger sister demanded to wear her viral signature wedding gown, even though it was promised to a museum and couldn't possibly fit her. I'm 28 and fashion has always been my passion. A couple of years ago, I finally took the leap and launched my own bridal line. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Out of all the gowns I've created, one in particular became my signature piece, a dramatic white wedding gown with layers of lace, sequins, glitter, and a full hoop skirt that gave it a kind of fairy tale quality. That dress ended up being modeled in a photo shoot by Leonardo DiCaprio's girlfriend at the time. I didn't get to meet him, sadly, but the exposure was priceless. The dress went viral online, and for me, it became more than just fabric stitched together. I had designed it during one of the hardest periods of my life, while I was being cheated on. Pouring myself into that work gave me an outlet, and something beautiful to hold onto when everything else felt ugly. Because of that, it's not just another design, it's deeply personal to me. Fast forward to now. My younger sister, Kim, is 19. Life hasn't been easy for her. She's autistic, and social situations can be hard for her to navigate. Relationships have always been a struggle, but she recently got engaged to her boyfriend, who's 30. They've been together for about a year, and now they're planning a wedding. When she came to me about her dress, she didn't just want any gown. She wanted the gown, the one that went viral, the one that's been written about, reposted, and celebrated. She told me she wanted to wear it for her big day, and my heart sank a little. Here's why. First, that gown is already promised to a museum exhibit featuring up-and-coming designers. For me, that's huge. Having my work on display in that setting is a career milestone, and I can't exactly back out. There's a hard deadline, and the logistics are already set in stone. Second, and just as important, the dress simply won't fit her. It's a size 0, built on a very specific frame, and Kim is about a size 22. Altering a gown that extreme isn't just a matter of letting out a few seams. I would have to completely deconstruct the original, somehow track down rare fabric I may never find again, and rebuild it from the ground up. It would destroy the original piece, and even then, there's no guarantee it would work. I sat down with her and calmly explained the situation. I told her about the museum commitment, and I made what I thought was a generous offer. I designed her a custom gown of her own, one that would fit her body perfectly, that reflected her style, and that would be every bit as beautiful as the viral dress. I thought she'd be excited about the idea. Instead, she burst into tears, loud, dramatic sobbing, repeating, "I want the museum dress. I want it," over and over. The noise brought our mom running in. She immediately wrapped Kim up in comfort, asking what had happened. I explained as gently as possible about the gown and the situation. I thought once she understood, she'd back me up. Instead, she looked puzzled and said, "So, what's the problem here? Why not just let her have the dress and then give it to the museum after?" I stared at her, almost in disbelief. Was she serious? I told her, A, I have a deadline, and B, it won't fit. At that point, Kim wailed louder. "She's calling me fat." That wasn't what I had said. I was pointing out a fact. The dress was the wrong size. But in her mind, it turned into a personal attack. Mom's face darkened, and she frowned at me. "You're being heartless here, Marilyn." That was the start of the storm. Since then, the narrative has been twisted. Kim is miserable, our parents are annoyed with me, and apparently the story spread to the rest of the family. One of my aunts even posted a passive-aggressive dig on Facebook about how family should come first. My phone's been blowing up with the texts from relatives and even Kim's friends telling me how selfish I'm being, how I should just be nice and give her the dress. Meanwhile, I'm here thinking, I'm an artist trying to build a career. That gown is my work, my livelihood, and my stepping stone to greater opportunities. I offered her something just as special, designed with her in mind, and it still wasn't good enough. And now, somehow, I'm the villain in everyone's eyes. That story stops there. This one feels like a classic case where practicality clashed with family expectations. The designer made a reasonable offer, but emotions took over, and suddenly facts about deadlines and sizing turned into accusations. And it's tough when art and family collide like that. This next story is about someone who accidentally got their neighbor's cat high and ended up the villain of the neighborhood Facebook group. Yesterday evening, I was cooking dinner in my apartment. I had the balcony door cracked open because the kitchen gets a little stuffy when I'm frying onions. Out of nowhere, my neighbor's cat strolled in. This cat basically acts like he owns the whole complex. So for the sake of this story, I'll call him Chairman Meow. He's got this way of moving through the place like he pays rent, and everyone kind of just accepts it. At first, I didn't think anything of it. He hops up on my counter sometimes or curls up on the couch, and usually I just let him do his thing until he gets bored. That night, I was half distracted anyway, frying onions on the stove, scrolling through TikTok with one hand, basically just vibing. Then I remembered something. I had a container sitting out on the counter from the night before. Inside it were a few special brownies I had baked for myself. When the thought clicked, I immediately went to grab one. But when I picked up the container, the lid was already loose. My stomach dropped. Half of one of the brownies was gone. I looked over and Chairman Meow was licking his face like he had just finished the best meal of his life. That's when it hit me. The cat had eaten it. I panicked instantly. I grabbed my phone and started frantically Googling things like, "Can cats get high?" "Weed brownies cat emergency," and "Symptoms cat ate edibles." My search history basically made me look like some kind of underground cartel vet. My brain went straight to worst case scenarios. I didn't waste any more time. I wrapped Chairman Meow in a blanket like a little burrito, scooped him up, and rushed to the emergency vet. Walking through those doors, I already felt like the villain in this story. And when I explained what happened, The look on the vet tech's face confirmed it. She looked at me like I had just personally tried to assassinate Garfield. $600 later, the verdict was in. The cat was fine. Totally fine. If anything, he was better than fine. The vet told me they flushed everything out and he'd be a little out of it, but there was no long-term harm. I was relieved, but my wallet felt like it had been mugged. That relief lasted about 12 hours, because the next morning I logged into our neighborhood Facebook group, and there it was. My neighbor had made a post that said something along the lines of, "Some irresponsible person got my sweet Chairman Meow high on drugs. Be careful who you live next to." And just like that, my secret was out. The comments section was pure chaos. Half the people were ready to grab their pitchforks, calling me reckless and demanding that whoever did it own up. The other half were tagging their friends and joking that this was peak apartment living. So now, in the eyes of my neighborhood, I've become the accidental menace of the complex. The person who corrupted the beloved Chairman Meow. And the kicker? This morning, Chairman Meow came right back. He scratched at my door until I let him in, and then he made a beeline for the kitchen counter. This dude was clearly trying to break into my apartment for round 2. He's got no shame, no hesitation. He knows exactly where the good stuff was. And apparently, I'm his new favorite dealer. So yeah, I didn't mean for it to happen, but now I'm officially the neighborhood's accidental cat drug dealer. That's the end of the story. That one's funny because the cat clearly doesn't care about the drama and just wants another hit of those brownies. The neighborhood Facebook group, though, always makes things 100 times more dramatic than they need to be. It's kind of crazy that the vet visit costs more than rent in some places. And honestly, I'm not surprised Chairman Meow came right back. Cats never forget where they find food. This next story is about a company that tried to roll out a poorly written workplace drug policy, and how one employee used that sloppy wording to shut down the office in hilarious fashion. I've always had a pet peeve about badly written policies. If a company is going to take the time to write rules for employees, they should at least do it properly, not slap something together that looks like an intern drafted it the night before. My wife brought home a prime example of this one day. Her company had just sent out a new fitness for work policy that everyone was supposed to sign and return. Knowing me, and knowing how I love to dissect rules, she showed it to me before signing. The whole document was flimsy, amateurish, poorly worded, full of vague instructions that barely made sense. It looked more like a rough draft than something official. But one section really caught my eye. It was the part about drugs in the workplace. The wording was simple. Employees were not to come to work under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and they were not to bring drugs or alcohol onto company property. That was it. No definitions, no clarifications, just a sweeping statement that raised more questions than it answered. I told my wife not to sign it right away. At the very least, I wanted them to define what drugs actually meant. Were they including Tylenol? What about antibiotics? Would Ritalin count since it's prescription? Or did they just mean illegal and recreational substances? Without specifics, the rule was wide open to interpretation. A few days later, they released version 2 of the policy. It was supposed to be the improved, clarified version. This time they had fleshed it out by adding a dictionary-style definition of drugs. It said something along the lines of, a non-prescription substance which has a physiological or mood-altering effect when ingested or otherwise introduced into the body. That definition changed everything, because now, according to the new policy, substances that altered mood, without a prescription, were completely banned. And that included something the office depended on: coffee. My wife saw the opportunity immediately. She signed the new version of the policy, handed it to HR, and went about her day. She didn't have to wait long for the results. By mid-morning, the atmosphere in the office had shifted from normal chatter to a storm of confusion and raised voices. Work ground to a halt as people crowded around the break room. The problem? The coffee was gone. Every last tin, bag, and jar had mysteriously vanished. And without their caffeine fix, the employees were buzzing for all the wrong reasons. The manager eventually tracked my wife down. She was the only one not running around in confusion. He asked her directly if she had anything to do with the missing coffee. Calmly, she admitted it was her, and then she pointed out why. The new workplace policy prohibited mood-altering substances without a prescription, and coffee absolutely fit that description. After all, Caffeine is well documented as a mood-altering drug. The manager tried to argue. "It's just coffee," he said, as if that alone excused it. But my wife stood firm. According to the company's own definition, coffee was indeed a mood-altering substance. And since no one in the office had a prescription for it, it was no longer allowed on the premises. She had made her point. Eventually, she revealed the stash of coffee she'd hidden away in the storeroom. The relief was instant. People practically cheered as they brewed fresh pots. The mood really did alter again, only this time in the right direction. Productivity returned, and the caffeine crisis was over. But her act of compliance had ripple effects. The stunt embarrassed management just enough that they realized the policy was not functional. Within weeks, the company actually commissioned a proper fitness for work policy, this time based on government guidelines, and written with the kind of clarity the original version completely lacked. Her little act of malicious compliance had not only proven a point, but had also pushed the company into finally doing what they should have done from the start, creating a policy that made sense. That's the end of this story. What makes this story so great is how quickly the loophole exposed itself. A vague definition meant to sound official ended up banning the one thing the whole office relied on to function. By simply following the rules to the letter, she managed to shut everything down until management got the message. The missing coffee spoke louder than any complaint ever could. This next story is about someone who finally got fed up with constant Medicare scam calls and decided to get revenge by wasting the scammer's time in the funniest way. Scam calls have pretty much become a normal part of life for me. I wish I could say they only popped up once in a while, but the truth is my phone lights up with them nearly every day. Sometimes I'll get 6 or 7 days in a row where I hear the same fake numbers ringing me nonstop. And it's not just random scams. The ones that really get under my skin are the Medicare scams. They're aggressive, relentless, and they just never stop. Block one number and, like clockwork, another one calls from a slightly different area code. For a long time, my strategy was simple. Answer, realize it's a scam, hang up. Or sometimes I just ignored the calls entirely. But after a while, I started getting tired of letting them waste my time and stress me out. I figured if they're going to keep harassing me, maybe I should turn the tables. Why not flip the script and waste their time instead? That's when I came up with an idea. Medicare scammers are usually looking for older people they think will be vulnerable or easily tricked. So I thought, why not give them exactly what they want? I pretend to be the most senile, confusing old man they'd ever spoken to in their lives. The call that really kicked this off started like many others. My phone buzzed, and sure enough, it was one of those generic numbers. I answered, and a woman on the other end launched into her pitch about some kind of flexible back brace. She claimed it was fully covered by Medicare and would help with pain relief. I knew immediately this was the usual scam. They'll either bill insurance fraudulently or just steal personal information. Normally I'd hang up, but this time I leaned into my character. I put on my best shaky, uncertain grandpa voice and acted like I was trying very hard to follow along. She asked me for my Medicare number, and instead of giving her anything real, I slowly and carefully read out the 1-800 number that Medicare itself uses for customer service. 1-800. I dragged it out painfully, like I was struggling to remember. She interrupted and told me that wasn't right, that she needed my ID number, not a phone number. But I kept going, reading out the digits like I was convinced I was helping. The more she tried to redirect me, the more I doubled down. I pretended to lose my place halfway through the number and start over. I mumbled about how small the letters on the card were, squinting and repeating myself as if I couldn't quite see what I was looking at. At one point, I even misread the word Medicare, as if it were part of the number. After about 10 minutes of this, she was audibly frustrated. Her voice got sharper, her patience thinner. She finally gave up on the Medicare number and asked me directly for my social security number. Now, obviously, I wasn't about to give her that, but I wasn't done with my act either. So I Googled the number for the Social Security Administration's customer service line and started slowly reading that out to her instead, just like I had with Medicare. She tried to cut me off again, but I acted confused and turned it all back on her. "Now, hold on a minute, young lady," I said in my most indignant old man tone. "Are you playing games with me? You're the one asking me all these silly questions. Do you want the number or not?" She tried to steady herself and redirect the conversation again, but I kept weaving in nonsense. Every time she asked for something specific, I gave her another official phone number, dragging out each digit with dramatic pauses. I accused her of tricking me, insisted she was the one wasting my time, and even threw in a random insult, calling her a stupid weevil at one point. That was the moment I knew I'd gotten under her skin. She went completely silent for a few seconds, then muted herself. I could practically hear her cussing me out with her microphone off. When she came back, her voice was clipped and tight, like she was grinding her teeth. But I wasn't done. I circled back and started reading the 1-800 Medicare number again, like we'd just started over. That was the final straw. She interrupted me, let out a sound somewhere between a groan and a growl, and then, click. She hung up mid-sentence. I sat back in my chair, grinning. I could just picture her ripping off her headset, tossing it onto the desk, and storming outside for a cigarette break. In my head, I imagined her muttering curses under her breath, complaining to a coworker about the crazy old man who had wasted 20 minutes of her life. For me, it was a small victory. Sure, it didn't stop the scam calls from coming in. I'll probably still get them tomorrow, next week, and the week after that. But in that moment, I got to flip the script. Instead of them preying on me, I got to frustrate them to the point where they gave up. Maybe they even flagged my number in their system after that, deciding it wasn't worth the trouble anymore. And if so, all the better. If I've been blacklisted from their scammer call lists, I'll wear that as a badge of honor. That story ends there. This one's pretty funny because it's the kind of revenge that doesn't hurt anyone innocent, but completely ruins a scammer's day. It's easy to imagine her losing her cool, while he just kept calmly stringing her along. Even if it doesn't stop the calls forever, at least he got to walk away with the last laugh. This next story is about a former employee who tried to hold a company laptop hostage after leaving the job, only for their legal threats to backfire almost immediately. A couple of weeks after a user's last day at our company, I was still waiting on them to return their work laptop. Their account had already been disabled as part of our standard offboarding process. That's the routine in our workplace. Once someone leaves, their access is cut off to protect company data. Eventually, the user walked back into the office holding the laptop. They looked a little frustrated and said, "Hey, I can't access the laptop anymore." I calmly explained that their last day had been over a week ago, and as standard leaver practice, their account was locked down. Nothing unusual, just the policy we followed with everyone. That's when they told me they needed their payslips, and on top of that, they had personal documents saved on the laptop. I let them know that payslips and employment documents could be requested through HR. But as far as the laptop went, their account was permanently disabled. Our security policy was clear. Once you leave, you don't get access again. The user got a little pushy and demanded, "I want those files back now." I kept my tone polite and professional. I reminded them that we were a medical company with very strict security rules. If they wanted to pursue retrieving any personal files, HR could request a security review, but there was no way I could just unlock their account. That's when they tried to flip the situation. They said, "I'm not giving this laptop back until you return my files." I held my ground. With my best customer service tone, I explained that their contract stated they had to return all company equipment when leaving, and the IT policy specifically forbade saving personal files to work systems in the first place. Instead of handing it over, they left with a laptop, throwing out the classic threat, "You'll be hearing from my solicitor." I sighed, flagged the situation with HR, InfoSec, and their former manager, and carried on with my day. Later that afternoon, the user returned, but this time it was different. They looked a lot less confident and a lot more sheepish. Security escorted them into the building. They set the laptop down on my desk without saying much, then were immediately escorted back out of the office. No shouting, no demands, just quiet resignation. It was pretty clear they either had a reputation for causing trouble or were suspected of trying to walk off with the company data. Either way, their bluff had collapsed. Management even pulled me aside later and gave me some praise for how calmly I handled the whole situation, which honestly made the hassle worth it. That's where the story ends. The whole situation really showed how empty threats can fall apart once real security steps in. They thought refusing to return the laptop gave them leverage, but all it did was make them look worse. In the end, they walked out with nothing but embarrassment, while the company stayed protected. This next story is about a new coworker who loudly mocked a personal item at work. a children's book the narrator brought to cope with their mom's dementia, and the fallout that followed. When the new guy started at my job a few weeks ago, I figured he'd settle in and find his groove like everyone else. On paper, he was solid. He showed up on time, learned fast, and didn't complain about the heavier shifts. The problem was that he had a running commentary for everything, like his brain couldn't hold a thought without pushing it straight out of his mouth. He narrated other people's tasks, weighed in on lunch choices, and delivered little speeches about how he used to do things at his last place. There's something personal my coworkers mostly know about me, even though I never wanted it to be common knowledge. My mom has dementia. It has been progressing for a while, and she doesn't really recognize her kids or my dad anymore. I've made peace, as much as anyone can, with a version of life where the woman who raised me doesn't always know who I am. Most days I manage fine, but there are days when the missing sneaks up on me. To help myself on those days, I have a small ritual. When it feels heavy, I reread a children's book she bought me when I was little. It's one of those bright, illustrated stories with a simple rhythm and a gentle message. I know it's a kid's book. That's the point. It reminds me of a time when she remembered everything, and I didn't have to be brave about any of it. On this particular day, the missing was loud before I even left the apartment. I slipped the book into my bag on my way out the door, planning to read a few pages on my break. Phones rang, printers chattered, chairs scraped across tile, and that low hum of people doing what needed to be done filled the background. I set my bag down in the break room, pulled the book out, and put it next to my water bottle while I walked to the microwave. I was gone for maybe 2 seconds. When I turned back, the new guy was standing over the table, holding my book like he'd found a joke to pass around. He wasn't curious. He was performing. In a big, showy voice that carried down the hallway, he said, "OMG, who brought a kid's book to work? I wouldn't even read this to my kids. They got better taste than that. This is just embarrassing." He laughed like he'd said something clever, and a couple of people outside the door turned their heads. In that split second, a lot of things happened in me at once. My face got hot. My throat pulled tight. Two feelings crashed together, anger and grief, and spilled over before I could sort them. I walked up and reached for the book, and he finally looked at me. My eyes stung, and before I could find the measured words I wanted, I just broke. Tears came hard and fast, the kind you can't blink away once they start. I miss my mom, I managed, and that was all I had. Everything paused. It was like someone turned the volume down on the whole building. Two of my coworkers were in the doorway, and they moved in instantly, one on each side. One grabbed a tissue box off the counter without even looking, and the other told him, calmly but firmly, to put the book down and step back. No yelling, no scene. Just a clear, "That's not your business, leave it." I could feel their arms around me, solid and warm, and I focused on the printed flowers on the tissue as I tried to slow my breathing. The book sat on the table between us like a small, fragile bridge to a safer time. The new guy's face lost all its canned confidence. He set the book down like it had burned him. He mumbled something about not knowing, then backed toward the door. My coworkers stayed with me through the rest of the break. They didn't make it a big conversation. They just sat, let me breathe, and asked if I wanted to finish lunch somewhere quieter. One of them picked up the book and slid it back into my bag like it was something precious, which to me, it is. After my break, those same coworkers went straight to our manager and explained what had happened. I didn't ask them to. I think they knew I didn't have the energy to relive it right then, and they wanted to make sure it didn't get brushed off as a misunderstanding. Later that afternoon, I saw the manager call the new guy into the office and close the door. When he came out, he was a different kind of quiet, the kind where someone has finally found the edge of the line. Word got back to me that he was told, in no uncertain terms, to stop commenting on people's personal items. It's not his business, and it's not professional. That was the official part. The unofficial part is that the social temperature around him shifted. The endless running commentary lost its audience, and without the attention, he didn't have much to say. Since then, he's avoided me like I've got a force field. If he has to ask me something for work, he keeps it brief, thanks me, and gets out of the way. I'm not trying to punish him. I'm just doing my job and taking care of my own space. But I won't pretend I don't notice the difference. People step in for each other when a line gets crossed. There's an unspoken understanding that we're allowed to keep certain things tender and private, even at work. Looking back on it now, I'm not proud that I cried in the break room, but I'm not ashamed either. I was angry, yes, but underneath that, I was hurting, and the tears said what I didn't have the words for in that moment. The book is still in my bag most days. Just knowing it's there helps. It's a small anchor I can hold when the missing gets loud again. As for the new guy, he's been quiet ever since. Maybe he just learned that there are consequences for using your voice like a bullhorn in other people's lives. Either way, the next time he reaches for a cheap laugh, I think he'll remember the look on my face and the sound of the manager's door closing. If that's what it took to bring a little more respect into the room, I'll take the moment as it happened and keep going. That story ends there. Not every correction needs fireworks. Sometimes a closed office door and a quiet room do the job. What stood out to me was how fast the team closed ranks and protected that boundary. The book wasn't just a book, and they treated it like that mattered. It's a relief when a workplace remembers people are human first. Feels like the kind of shift that sticks and makes the next day a little easier. This next story is about someone whose parents tried to take over her small wedding guest list, and things escalated into threats, insults, and ultimatums when she refused to give in. I'm getting married in the fall of 2026. I'm 25, my fiance is 31, and we've been together for almost 4 years now. It's been a relationship that has brought me so much stability and happiness. And when we started planning our wedding, I envisioned something small and intimate. Not a huge, extravagant production, but a meaningful ceremony with the people who truly matter most to us. My relationship with my parents has always been rocky. Growing up, things weren't easy, and my fiance has had very little to do with them because of how they treated me in the past. At one point, my parents even threatened to make me homeless. That was before my fiance and I bought our first home together, but the memory of those words still stings. After I moved out, things between us improved on the surface. I thought we were finding a better footing, and I hoped that planning a wedding might be a chance to celebrate as a family without the old baggage getting in the way. We planned a guest list of about 25 to 30 people, just a church ceremony followed by a nice meal. On my side, the guest list was simple. My parents, my brother, my grandmother, and 2 of my dad's childhood friends who I considered to be like uncles. My bridal party was going to be 3 close women friends, and I had even considered asking one of my male friends to be a bridesman. It felt balanced, thoughtful, and exactly the kind of wedding I wanted. The issue started when I asked one of my closest friends to be a bridesmaid. She's someone I met at work in my early 20s, and from the start, she's been a constant support in my life. She's also the reason I even met my fiance in the first place, so her involvement feels incredibly special. But my mom immediately objected. She claimed I didn't know this friend deeply enough, despite the fact that she's been by my side for years. It felt dismissive and controlling, as if my mom got to decide the definition of close in my own life. That was only the beginning. From there, my parents started pushing their own agenda. They demanded I invite a whole list of people I barely know, people I haven't spoken to in years, just so they would have more representation on their side of the wedding. These weren't people I envisioned being part of one of the most important days of my life. To me, they would add nothing but tension and awkwardness to what was supposed to be a day of joy. So naturally, I refused. That's when things spiraled. My parents' behavior became extreme and manipulative. They called me pathetic. They threatened to invite these people themselves, behind my back, just to ruin the day for me. They posted publicly online saying my fiance and I were awful people, and claiming they wouldn't even attend the wedding. My dad went as far as to call the entire wedding a sham. It hurt deeply. Instead of sharing in my excitement, my parents turned it into a battleground. What should have been a happy season of planning became filled with stress, second-guessing, and disappointment. I kept coming back to one simple belief. The guest list belongs to me and my fiance, and no one else. This is our wedding, not theirs. We're the ones getting married, and we're the ones paying for the entire thing ourselves. I know some people believe that if parents are footing the bill, they get to have some kind of say. But in this case, they aren't paying a single cent. We've saved, budgeted, and covered all the costs on our own. That was important to us because we wanted full control over how the day looked and felt. It's not about excluding people for the sake of it. It's about choosing who we want, standing beside us on a day that celebrates our love and commitment. Instead of respecting that boundary, my parents tried to bulldoze through it, and when I didn't give in, they lashed out with cruelty. It makes me wonder if I was naive to think that our relationship had actually improved after I moved out. Maybe the quiet was just the calm before another storm. At the end of the day, I want my wedding to be about love, not power struggles. I want to look around the room and see people who have been there for me and my fiance, people who celebrate us without strings attached. And if that means my parents don't show up because they couldn't get their way, then maybe that's a choice they're making, not me. That story stops there. Family drama at weddings always seems to turn up the volume on everything. What stood out here is how quickly her parents went from disagreeing to making threats and even trashing her online. That kind of reaction says a lot. Honestly, it makes the choice to hold firm on the guest list feel even more understandable. This next story is about a woman who raised her niece through tough years, only for tensions to flare when her sister got upset that friends jokingly referred to her as Grandma. When I was 33, I became the guardian of my niece. She was only 13 at the time, and she'd just lost my mom to cancer. Up until then, she had been living with my mom, and the plan was for me to step in temporarily until her mother, my sister, could get custody back. My sister had lost custody years before due to drug addiction. For a while, it looked like she might regain custody, but when we lost our mom, she relapsed as a way of coping. That left my niece with me full time. From the beginning, I drew a clear line. I never wanted my niece to feel like she had to call me mom. I was her aunt, not a replacement for her mother. What I wanted to be was someone she could count on, someone who provided for her, kept her safe, and always gave her a space where she could talk openly without fear of judgment. Over the years, my friends would sometimes slip and refer to her as my daughter. I always corrected them, telling them she was my niece, but they'd just smile and insist, "Say what you want, but you're her mom." I'd brush it off every time, but deep down, I carried a little pride in how much they saw me as filling that role. Fast forward to this year, and my niece had a baby. My sister, now 38, has been back in her life. She's been clean for 2 years and steadily working on her recovery. She wants to step into the role of grandmother, filling the space that our mom never got to occupy. Honestly, I thought that was wonderful. I was excited at the idea of finally just being the cool aunt again, while she got to take on that new role with pride. Then came the party. I hosted a gathering at my place, and at one point during the evening, one of my friends looked at me with a grin and said, "How's my favorite gilf doing?" It was meant as a playful twist on the well-known acronym, only instead of mom, they said grandma. I laughed, answered her question, and the conversation moved on without a hitch. It was just banter among friends, nothing serious. But later, my sister came up to me, clearly unhappy. She asked why my friend had called me a gilf. I explained that ever since my niece got pregnant, some of my friends had jokingly called me grandma. I didn't think much of it. It was a silly nickname, and to me, it wasn't worth correcting in the middle of the party. Her reaction was immediate. She made a face of disgust and said, "You're not a grandmother. I'm the grandmother. You're just her aunt." I tried to brush it off, telling her I knew that and that I was just excited to see my friends. I shrugged, hoping it would calm things down. Instead, she doubled down, saying it was rude of me not to correct them, especially since she had been standing right there. My niece overheard us and jumped in, trying to defend me. She explained that my friends have always said things like that, how they'd even referred to her as my daughter before. That only made my sister more upset. She snapped, "She's not your daughter. She is my daughter. I made the hard decision to let her stay with you because you could give her things that I couldn't, but that does not make you her mother." The tension in the room was heavy after that. My niece kept trying to speak up for me, but my sister wouldn't hear any of it. Eventually, she picked up the baby in the car seat and went outside, waiting for my niece to leave with her. Before my niece went out, I hugged her goodbye and told her not to worry. I reassured her that her mom would get over it with time. Weeks have passed since then, though, and my sister still hasn't responded to any of my messages. The silence is starting to weigh on me. Part of me wonders if I should have just done what I always did before, corrected my friends immediately and avoided the confrontation altogether. But another part of me feels like she's making a mountain out of a molehill. I don't want her to think I'm trying to take her place. She's worked so hard to get to where she is in her recovery, and I am genuinely proud of her for it. At the same time, I can't deny that I was the one who raised my niece through those years. I was there for every milestone, every challenge, every moment when she needed a parent figure. That bond is real, even if I never claim the title of mom. To my friends, it shows through in the way we interact. To my sister, it feels like a threat to her role, and I'm stuck in the middle, torn between trying to keep the peace and not feeling like I should have to apologize for jokes I didn't even make. That's where this story finishes. This one really highlights how layered family dynamics can get. It's clear the sister is proud of her recovery, but also sensitive about her place in her daughter's and grandchild's lives. Meanwhile, the aunt stepped into a parent role for years, and that bond doesn't just disappear. The tension feels less about the joke itself and more about everything that came before. This next story is about someone who did everything right to rebuild her life, only to watch her brother drain their parents' life savings, and how her anger spilled out during a phone call with her mom. I grew up in a family that started modestly, but eventually became well off. By my late teens, my parents' careers had taken off. They weren't just comfortable, they were wealthy. My brother and I both got luxury cars as our first cars without even blinking. My mom was a powerhouse in the business world. I practically grew up in her office, doing little tasks, roaming the halls, and starting my first paying internship at 15. My brother had the same opportunities, but while the money came in, our family wasn't without trauma. My brother, let's call him A, always had a sinister streak. When we were little, he would lock me in the closet for hours, pretending it was cops and robbers. He'd chase me around the house with knives and stab the wall next to my face as a scare tactic. He duct taped our cousin to a computer chair for laughs. He killed squirrels with a BB gun just because he could. That was his sense of humor, even as a kid. My mom grew up in a foreign country with almost nothing and came to America with $5 in her pocket. She climbed the corporate ladder and became a self-made millionaire. The classic American dream. But the trade-off was that she wasn't around much, and her love language became gift-giving. For a while, as a kid, that was enough. But as I got older and life hit harder, I craved emotional connection instead of material things. I didn't get that. I turned to drugs at a young age and spiraled for years. But I eventually clawed my way back up. I got clean, earned a degree, and deliberately refused to take easy jobs or handouts from my parents. I wanted to prove I could do it on my own. I built a career in a field where I had zero connections. Over 8 years, I reached goals I never thought possible. I got married, bought a home, a car, kept doing the next right thing like people told me to. My brother went the opposite direction. His addiction deepened. My parents, unwilling to admit both their kids were struggling, coddled him instead of holding him accountable. They let appearances outweigh reality. They still funded his endless business ideas, get-rich-quick schemes with no real work behind them, while ignoring the trail of destruction he left. He stole my father's social security number to open accounts, took out credit cards, rented apartments he never paid for, and illegally Airbnb'd, and used forged documents to move into their luxury complex so he could keep stealing. The latest scheme was the worst. By lying, manipulating, and forging, he made off with over $2 million of my parents' retirement savings and left them $3 million in debt. For a year and a half, I've begged them to take him to court, to report him to the IRS for fraud. One parent is willing, but the other isn't. Without both on board, nothing happens. Meanwhile, I've been struggling quietly. I have a good job in a relatively cheap state, but my husband changed careers last year, and his income has been dropping. I was up for a promotion and thought we'd be fine, but due to government budget cuts in my field, I didn't get it. At the same time, homeownership has brought one emergency expense after another, draining the savings I'd built over 8 years. My $20,000 cushion has dwindled to $3,000. This month, for the first time, I realized I couldn't cover a full week of groceries along with our bills. I usually call my mom 3 or 4 times a week, but lately I've been so stressed I've avoided picking up the phone. I didn't want to unload everything on her, but eventually I had to respond. So today I called. At first we talked like normal. Then she mentioned another court case stemming from one of my brother's scams, and I snapped. I told her exactly how I felt. I said I'm angry. Angry that I've done everything right, built a life from nothing, gotten clean, worked hard, and yet I'm struggling to buy groceries while my brother posts on social media partying with socialites and celebrities like nothing happened. Angry that the one time I might have fallen back on the financial safety net my parents always promised was there, it's gone. Gone because he stole it. because he bled them dry to fund his image. I cried. She cried. And instantly I regretted it. I hated making her feel bad because in my heart I know it's not really her fault. It's my brother's. But I can't stop being angry at everyone. I feel like I'm drowning and the person who caused it is facing zero consequences. And that's where I'm at. Tired, stressed, angry, and guilty for even feeling this way. That's the end of this story. This one really captures how long-running family patterns can crash into the present. The narrator did everything to stand on their own, and yet their brother's choices still ripple into their life. The anger makes sense, but so does the guilt for unloading it on their mom. It's a tough spot to be in, and you can feel all the years of frustration behind that phone call. This next story is about a condo resident who dealt with a dog-hating neighbor by leaving her a very smelly surprise. Back when I lived in a 35-story high-rise condo, I had a lab named Bubba. He was a big, gentle dog, well-trained, and usually didn't cause any trouble. But after catching an infection, he had to go on medication, and one of the side effects meant he needed bathroom trips almost every single hour. For about 4 days straight, I was using my paid time off just to take care of him, and my ex even helped one night so I could get some rest. Bubba had also just had surgery, so the stairs weren't an option for him. And living on the 34th floor, stairs would have been a nightmare anyway. Now, in that building, the elevators were already a problem. There were 3 of them, and during peak hours, like 7 in the morning or 5 in the evening, you could wait 15 to 20 minutes just to get a ride down. It was frustrating enough without extra drama, but unfortunately, one of my neighbors seemed to have an intense dislike, or maybe even a phobia, of dogs. I had seen her before, literally trying to kick other residents' dogs off the elevator. It wasn't just fear, it was aggressive. One evening around 5 p.m., I was waiting with Bubba, who was patiently sitting in the corner with his big cone on, clearly fresh out of surgery. We had already waited 15 minutes for an elevator, and finally, one opened up. Just as I was about to step inside with Bubba, that same neighbor told me I needed to wait for the next elevator because she didn't want a dog in there with her. I told her no, I wasn't waiting any longer. Bubba needed to get outside, and she was just going to have to deal with it. The elevator doors closed, and that's when she actually tried to grab at my dog. I immediately stepped in between them and told her flat out that wasn't happening. Bubba stayed calm. We got down to the ground floor, and he did his business outside like normal. I cleaned it up, bagged it, and headed back upstairs. But in that moment, I was fuming. This woman wasn't just being difficult. She was putting her hands on my dog, and I'd already seen her kick at other people's pets. That's when the petty idea hit me. Since I was already carrying around dozens of little white poop bags every single day, I decided she was going to get a piece of that life. Starting the very next morning, I left a collection of Bubba's neatly tied bags right on her doorknob and front mat. By 8 a.m., she had about 10 fresh deliveries waiting for her. It wasn't subtle, but it was satisfying. To avoid any chance of the condo board tracing it back to me, I eventually switched from the generic white bags to black ones. That way, no one could point fingers if anyone complained about mystery packages in the hallway. And yes, I know it was petty, but this was a woman who demanded private elevator rides, tried to grab my dog, and openly kicked at others. At that point, I didn't care. So, while Bubba recovered and kept needing constant trips outside, she kept finding little reminders of why you don't mess with someone's pet. She wanted a private elevator? Well, she got something else instead. That story wraps up here. That one cracked me up because the revenge was so simple, but so effective. The neighbor wanted control over the elevators, but instead she ended up with bags of reality on her doorstep. It's kind of wild that she thought kicking dogs was ever okay in the first place. Honestly, the image of 10 bags lined up outside her door is just too perfect. This next story is about someone running their own small clothing brand, only for a cousin to demand free items and drag their mom into it when they refused. When I was 19, I had started up my own clothing brand. It wasn't some huge operation with warehouses and staff. It was me, designing everything myself, creating the concepts, and outsourcing the actual manufacturing to another company. I handled the business side, the creative side, and all the logistics of bringing each collection together. It was a lot of work, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. One day I got a call from my cousin, who was about 20 at the time. She told me she wanted a couple of items from my most recent collection. Specifically, she asked for 2 t-shirts and 2 hoodies. Altogether, that order would have come to about 90 pounds. At first I thought, okay, that's cool. She wants to support my work, but then she made it clear she wasn't looking to actually buy them. I told her the cost and she immediately pushed back. She said, "We're family, lad. I should be getting it for free." I tried to calmly explain that it doesn't work like that. I don't even get my own pieces for free because I outsource all of the manufacturing. I still have to pay for everything up front before I even see a profit. But she wasn't hearing it. She kept insisting that, as family, she was entitled to free items. Like my hard work and expenses didn't count. The next thing I knew, she went behind my back and contacted my mom. She told her that I wasn't sorting out family by giving her what she wanted. My mom then stormed into my room, clearly annoyed, and told me my cousin was going mad over this. But when I explained the situation, my mom backed me up completely. She told my cousin in no uncertain terms to knock it off and stop expecting things for free. I was already irritated that my cousin thought she deserved something I'd worked so hard on without paying for it, but the fact that she pulled my mom into it pushed me over the edge. I asked her what her problem really was and why she felt entitled to treat me that way. She started apologizing, but honestly, the damage was done. Since then, I haven't really liked her. That moment made it clear how little she respected what I was trying to build. That story ends there. What sticks out here is how common it is for people to undervalue someone's work just because they're family. Instead of supporting the brand, the cousin turned it into drama, which says a lot more about her than about the storyteller. Good thing the mom shut that down right away. This next story is about a teenager whose parents neglected and verbally abused him for years while focusing all their energy on his disabled brother. And now that they're suddenly trying to bond, he's refusing to play along. Growing up, I never really felt like I had parents. Sure, they were physically there, but all of their attention was on my younger brother. He's 16 now, and he has disabilities that have always required a lot of care. Because of that, my parents treated me like I was invisible. When I was little, if I tried to get their attention, they didn't just brush me off. They yelled at me. They cursed at me. I can remember being as young as 4 or 5, crying out for attention or comfort, and instead of an adult's reassurance, I got rage. That was my normal for over 10 years. Eventually, I learned that the only way to survive was to be on my own. I stopped asking them for anything. I stopped expecting warmth or encouragement. It wasn't worth the backlash. I taught myself that silence was safer than opening my mouth. Recently, though, things shifted, at least temporarily. My brother went into respite care for the first time ever, and without him at home, suddenly my parents turned their attention to me. It was jarring, honestly. After years of being ignored or cursed at, they wanted to bond. My mom even said she made my favorite meal, except it wasn't my favorite. It was something with mushrooms, which I absolutely hate and would never eat in a million years. When I pointed that out, they looked surprised and said, "Oh, but we all love mushrooms." That's when it hit me. They don't even know the first thing about me. They never cared enough to notice the most basic details of what I like or don't like. And now, out of nowhere, they want to play at being a family? I told them flat out to stop pretending. They told me that wasn't fair, but I pushed back. I reminded them how often they'd shoved me away, how many times they'd yelled and cursed at me just for wanting their attention. They tried excusing it all by saying they were under so much stress because of my brother, but I asked them directly, does that make it okay? Does that make it okay that even when I was a little kid who needed love and guidance, they treated me like a burden? The conversation almost blew up into a fight, but I walked away before it escalated. And when they tried again the next day, telling me they were just sitting and talking and wanted me to join, I ignored them. Then came another day where they suggested going for a drive together, like a family outing. I shut that down too. I told them they weren't making up for anything. They don't get to erase years of neglect and abuse just by deciding for a week or two that they suddenly want to know me. Of course, they said it wasn't fair because they're trying now. They went back to their old line about how I don't understand how hard their life is. Then they tried to claim they want to know me better, to ask how school's going, what classes I'm taking, what my teachers think of me. They even asked me to help them figure out the school's parent portal, the same one they never bothered signing up for when it actually mattered. For me, it's easier to just ignore them than to keep shutting them down verbally. Every time I open my mouth, it turns into another fight, another chance for them to lash out, and I'm tired of it. I've had enough years of being cursed at for existing. The truth is, I know my brother will be home soon, and when he comes back, I'll go back to being invisible again. That's the pattern. So why fight for their attention now? Why set myself up for more disappointment and anger? I've already learned how to be on my own. That hasn't changed. That's where the story ends. This one feels really heavy, because you can sense just how long the neglect went on. It's tough when parents only want to show interest once it's convenient for them. After years of being treated like nothing, it makes sense that the trust just isn't there anymore. This next story is about a hotel front desk worker who stepped away briefly to help a guest, only to deal with impatient newcomers furiously ringing the bell and calling nonstop like it would magically speed things up. Working at a hotel, you get used to certain patterns of behavior. Some guests are polite, patient, and understanding. Others, not so much. And lately I've noticed that people seem to be getting more impatient than ever. I get it. Traveling is exhausting, and by the time you reach the front desk, you just want your key and a bed. But if the front desk agent isn't standing there the second you arrive, it's not because they've abandoned their post. It's because they're helping someone else. This all happened around 10 at night on a weekend when the hotel was about 40% full. By then, the lobby was quiet. I hadn't seen anyone for almost 2 hours, and there was just one check-in left on the books. Then I got a call from a guest who had checked in earlier in the evening. She was having issues with her TV. Luckily, her room wasn't far from the desk. Before leaving, I grabbed the cordless phone and put out a sign that clearly said, "We are away from the desk. We will return in a few minutes. Thank you for your patience." When I got to the guest's room, the problem became obvious. The cable box was unplugged. The tricky part was that the TV, fridge, and microwave were all sitting on a massive stand that I had to move to get to the outlet. So there I was, squeezing myself behind this heavy piece of furniture to plug everything back in, when suddenly I heard it. Ring, 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 ring. The lobby bell was being slammed repeatedly. For a second, I thought maybe it was an emergency. I tried to wiggle my way out, but before I could, the ringing stopped, and the phone immediately went off. I answered as best I could, still halfway trapped behind the TV. "Thank you for calling our hotel. Please hold for a moment." A voice cut in. "Hey, we're at the desk and need to check in." "Okay," I said. "Give me a few minutes. I'm behind a TV." They hung up. No response. I focused back on the cable, but 30 seconds later, the phone rang again. I picked it up, still trying to finish the job. "Thank you for calling hotel. Please hold for a moment." The same voice again. "We're still at the desk and want to check in." I repeated. "I'm still stuck behind a TV doing maintenance. I'll be out in just a few minutes max." Click. Hung up again. By then I had the cable box reconnected. It had taken less than a minute between the two calls to get it all sorted. As I started sliding the heavy stand back into place, I heard it again. Ring, 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 ring. The bell was going non-stop. At this point, I was more annoyed than anything else. The guest I had been helping told me not to worry, to go handle the desk. She thanked me as I rushed out. Walking down the hall, I could still hear the bell hammering through the quiet building. Another guest even poked their head out of their room to ask what was going on. I apologized and explained that it was just some impatient guests. When I finally got back, I found a couple in their 50s waiting at the desk. The bell was still vibrating from their last round of slamming it. I quickly pulled down the "Be right back" sign and apologized, explaining there had been a small emergency. The woman smiled and said, "It's all good. We just wanted to make sure you knew we were here and that you could hear us no matter where you were." That's when it hit me. They weren't ringing the bell like normal guests. They were pounding it over and over at 10 at night when most of the hotel was already sleeping. And as if that wasn't enough, they had called the hotel phone multiple times, even after I told them exactly where I was and what I was doing. All told, I was away from the desk for maybe 3 minutes total, including the phone calls and the time before they started ringing. But to them, that must have felt like an eternity. For me, it was just another reminder that no matter how clear the sign, no matter how short the wait, some people simply can't be patient. And here's the truth. Ringing the bell doesn't summon me like a genie. Calling the hotel phone while standing in the lobby doesn't make me teleport faster. Sometimes you just have to wait. That's where this story ends. This one almost feels like a comedy sketch. The employee trapped behind the TV while the bell just keeps slamming. What stands out is how the guests weren't just impatient, They acted like persistence would bend reality. 3 minutes isn't long, but they made it feel like chaos. This next story is about someone who opened their home to a friend who needed a place to stay. But when that friend overstayed and disrespected boundaries, it led to a tough choice. I've always been the type of person who feels responsible for being there when friends need me. I don't always have the perfect advice or the deepest pockets, but if someone calls me and says they're in a rough spot, my first instinct is usually to help however I can. That's exactly what happened with my friend Jenna. One evening, she called me sounding stressed and a little desperate. She said she had nowhere to stay for a week. There wasn't much detail beyond that. No dramatic backstory, no specific emergency. Just that she needed somewhere to land for a little while. Without overthinking it, I offered her my apartment. I didn't even stop to weigh whether I'd be comfortable with it or how it might affect my routine. She was my friend, and in that moment, that was enough. Before she arrived, I tried to make her feel as welcome as possible. I cleared a space in the living room, set up pillows, blankets, and even made sure she had an outlet nearby for her phone and laptop. I grabbed some of her favorite snacks from the store, figuring she'd appreciate the small gesture. In my head, I pictured us spending the week catching up like we used to, cooking together, watching shows, and just relaxing. And at first, that's how it felt. The first night went smoothly. We made dinner, sat on the couch, and laughed at one of the old shows we used to binge. It was fun, almost nostalgic, like stepping back into the easier days of our friendship. But by the second day, things started to shift. I noticed small things at first. She left dishes in the sink, left wrappers on the counter, and didn't seem to pick up after herself. I brushed it off at first, telling myself, it's just a few days. Don't make a big deal out of it. Still, little by little, the apartment started to feel different. I'm used to having my home in order. I'm not obsessive, but I like walking into a clean space after work. With Jenna there, though, it felt like I was walking into someone else's mess. I do the dishes, and 10 minutes later, the sink would be full again. I'd take out the trash, and she'd toss more in without even tying up the old bag. I tried dropping hints. I'd say things like, hey, could you grab those dishes while I clean this up? Or maybe we should do a quick tidy up before we make dinner. She'd just laugh, wave it off, and say something like, it's just a few days, relax. At first I smiled along, but inside it started to sting. Because it wasn't just about the chores, it was about feeling like she didn't respect my space at all. By day 3 and 4, the stress really started to build. My apartment is small, and with 2 people in it constantly, it felt crowded. She spread her things out like the place was hers. Clothes draped over chairs, makeup on the bathroom counter, her bag blocking the hallway. Every time I stepped around it, I felt more claustrophobic. On top of that, I realized I was losing the comfort of coming home. Normally, walking through my front door is my way to exhale after a long day. But during that week, I found myself dragging my feet, not wanting to go inside because I didn't know what new mess or tension I'd walk into. It felt like I was paying rent on a place that wasn't mine anymore. I reached my breaking point when I tried one last time to hint at how I felt. I said, hey, could you maybe help out a bit more around the place? I've been feeling a little overwhelmed. She laughed again, the exact same way as before, and said, you're overthinking this. It's not a big deal. That was the moment I knew I couldn't keep quiet. I couldn't spend the rest of the week bottling it up. I sat her down and told her, as calmly as I could, that I wasn't comfortable with her staying for the full week. I explained that I felt stressed, that my space wasn't being respected, and that I needed to set some boundaries for my own well-being. She didn't take it lightly. Her face changed, and she immediately got defensive. She said I was overreacting. She accused me of not being a good friend, of kicking her out when she needed me. She said a real friend wouldn't care about a few dishes or clutter. I tried to explain that it wasn't about one specific thing. It was about how everything added up and made me feel like a stranger in my own home. The conversation didn't end neatly. She packed up her things quickly, still upset, and left. Since then, she hasn't answered my texts. She's been ignoring me, and now mutual friends are asking what happened between us. I don't know exactly what she's telling them, but I can tell from the questions that the story she's giving is different from mine. And here's where I'm stuck. Part of me knows I needed to protect my boundaries. It's my apartment, my safe space, and I shouldn't have to sacrifice my peace just to avoid upsetting someone else. But another part of me wonders if I could have handled it differently. Could I have been more patient? Could I have been firmer earlier instead of letting it build until I snapped? I don't regret setting boundaries, but I do regret that it damaged our friendship so badly. That story ends there. This one really shows how even good intentions can backfire. Offering a place to stay felt kind in the moment, but when respect for the space wasn't there, it turned into stress fast. Sometimes setting boundaries feels harsh, but letting things drag on only makes it worse. This next story is about a family trip to Italy that was supposed to be smooth and carefree until one cousin brought her kid along, and he managed to turn an entire day in Florence into chaos. We had been planning this Italy trip for months. 6 adults, no kids, just a chance to enjoy the sights, eat incredible food, and relax without responsibilities. The plan was simple: travel light, keep the schedule flexible, and soak in as much of Florence as we could in a single day before catching our evening flight. Everything should have been easy. Everything should have been fun. But then my cousin decided to bring her 10-year-old son. One decision, one kid, and suddenly all of that simplicity and freedom went out the window. I hate to say it, but he ruined the day. We checked out of our Airbnb at 10 in the morning. The flight wasn't until the evening, so I had thought ahead and booked us a bounced luggage storage near Santa Maria Novella. That way we wouldn't have to drag suitcases all over Florence. The process was flawless. Drop the bags, get the QR code, and suddenly we were hands-free. I remember thinking, this is going to be such a good day. For about 5 minutes, I believed it. Then the kid got involved. Our first stop was Piazza della Signoria. The place is alive with energy. Statues everywhere, tourists clustered around taking pictures, and even a street performer painted head to toe in silver, standing perfectly still like a statue. The crowd gathered around him, laughing and clapping every time he moved, just slightly. The kid stared at him for a moment, head tilted like he was studying a puzzle, and then, without hesitation, he walked right up and pinched the man's leg. Not a curious tap or a gentle poke. A full-on pinch like he was testing the paint. The silver man broke character instantly, jerking back in pain. The kid screamed, startled by the reaction. The crowd burst into laughter. The performer started shouting in Italian, clearly furious. My cousin stumbled forward, apologizing frantically while trying to pull her son back. I just stood there watching, mortified, thinking, I hate this. I hate everything about this. We finally dragged him away from the performer, and I told myself maybe, just maybe, we could salvage the day. But Florence had other plans. Within minutes, the kid ran straight to the Neptune fountain, eyes wide like he'd just discovered his personal playground. Before anyone could stop him, he started climbing it, climbing Neptune, like it was a jungle gym in a park back home. A guard blew his whistle so sharply that the entire piazza went silent. Heads turned. Tourists stopped mid-photo. All eyes were on us, or more specifically, on the child scrambling on the fountain like a wild animal. My cousin's face turned purple with embarrassment. The guard stormed over, and the kid looked as if he'd just been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. At that point, I was done. I wanted nothing more than to disappear into the cobblestone streets and pretend I wasn't connected to this traveling circus. The rest of the day was a blur of stress. Instead of walking leisurely, admiring art, and eating gelato, we were constantly chasing after the kid, trying to keep him from causing another international incident. Every laugh, every conversation, every ounce of excitement had drained out of us. 6 adults, and not one of us had the energy to smile by the end. By the time we returned to pick up our luggage that night, the silence was deafening. No chatter, no jokes, no excitement about what we'd seen. Just 6 grown adults completely worn down by one child, who had managed to turn Florence into his own personal war zone. On the train to the airport, I sat there stewing. I kept thinking about how I had planned everything so carefully, even paying for luggage storage so we could explore Florence light and carefree. Instead, I got cardio from chasing a kid, humiliation from the whistles and shouting, and babysitting duties I had never signed up for. I'll admit it, more than once, under my breath, I muttered, "Stupid kid," because in that moment, I hated the whole day. And more than that, I hated that my cousin thought it was even remotely a good idea to bring him in the first place. That's where this story finishes. This one shows how just one decision can completely change the tone of a trip. 6 adults planned for freedom, but adding a kid into the mix flipped it into chaos. The way everyone ended the day in total silence says it all. The energy was gone, replaced with exhaustion. This next story is about a husband who reached his limit with his wife's endless collection of Stanley cups and dirty containers, and finally assigned her the dishwashing chore. My wife has what I can only describe as a full-blown obsession with Stanley cups. Not just a couple, she has at least 24 of them, probably more hiding somewhere in the cabinets, and she uses them religiously, 3 a day without fail. One for her morning coffee, one for flavored water, and a third she takes to work empty so she can fill it with whatever strikes her fancy during the day. For years, I let this habit slide. We've been married for 9 years, and honestly, chores were never a major issue. The way we always divided things up was simple. I handled lawn care and garbage, because the smell of trash makes her gag. We split cooking, cleaning, and laundry pretty evenly, just taking care of whatever needed to be done as we saw it. That system worked well enough, but everything changed earlier this year in March, when I took a new position. It was technically a lateral move, but the structure of my job shifted dramatically. Now I work from home 4 days a week, with the 5th day being a half-day split between 2 offices. On those office days, I'm still home by 3 o'clock. With all that extra time at home, it naturally made sense for me to pick up more chores. And I did. I vacuum, I mop, I fold and put away laundry. I handle the garbage, mow the grass, and cook more often than not. I'm not complaining about any of that. In fact, I'd say I've leaned in hard to take on the majority of household tasks because I know my work situation is easier than hers now. But there's one issue I just can't take anymore. Her habits with dishes. See, her office is in a pretty remote location with very few lunch options nearby. Because of that, she usually packs leftovers from dinner. No problem there. The problem comes afterward, when she leaves the dirty, unrinsed containers in her car for days. By the time she finally drags them into the house, they smell absolutely awful. And instead of rinsing them out, she dumps them in the sink and walks away. That would already be frustrating, but then add in the mountain of Stanley cups she goes through every single day. Between the cups, their lids, and the straws, the dishwasher fills up fast. Every few days, the entire bottom rack is just her stuff. And once it's all washed, she still expects me to reassemble everything, matching each lid and straw back with the correct cup before storing them away. I reached my breaking point. I told her straight up, if she wants to keep ignoring my request to bring her containers in daily, or at least rinse them at work, then the dishes are her responsibility now. It's not fair for me to deal with the nasty smell, the clutter, and the endless puzzle of organizing cup accessories. She didn't take it well. According to her, I'm being unreasonable. She says that because I work from home and don't have a commute, I have way more free time, so I should be doing the majority of chores. And from her perspective, this includes dishes. But from my perspective, I'm already doing the majority of chores. Almost everything, really. The laundry, the vacuuming, the mopping, the garbage, the lawn care, most of the cooking. The only thing I've asked her to take over is the dishes, specifically because they're her mess, created by her habits. It feels unfair to expect me to keep doing literally everything, especially when I've asked her multiple times to at least meet me halfway and rinse things out. That story wraps up here. This one highlights how chores aren't just about who has more free time, but about fairness and respect. Taking on most of the housework already shows effort, but drawing the line at nasty dishes and endless cup parts seems pretty reasonable. This next story is about a customer in a store who kept mistaking inventory workers for actual employees and ended up loudly losing her patience when nobody would help her. Back in 2006, I was working for a company called RGIS, which did inventory for all kinds of retail stores. Our job was pretty simple, but also incredibly tedious. We'd walk into a store, get assigned an aisle, and literally count everything on the shelves. Every single item had to be scanned and logged. We didn't actually work for the stores themselves. We were just contracted to go in, do the numbers, and then leave. Now, this particular day, my team had been sent to a Fred Meyer in the Seattle area. If you're not familiar, Fred Meyer is kind of a mix between a grocery store, a department store, and a home goods place. They sell a little bit of everything. Employees there didn't really have a strict uniform. They had a dress code, sure, but it wasn't like a flashy vest or a name tag that stood out. They just wore regular, work-appropriate clothes. On the other hand, RGIS had us all in these matching maroon shirts. It made it clear we were one group, but it also made us look very different from the actual Fred Meyer workers. On top of that, we were all holding the same little handheld scanners. constantly pointing them at products and tapping in numbers. If you walk down the aisle, you'd see 5 or 6 of us, heads down, scanning lipstick or mascara one by one, like robots. That's the scene I was in when this whole thing happened. My group was finishing up the cosmetics aisle, which meant we were all crowded in there together, trying to get it done quickly. I remember being halfway buried in a section of eyebrow pencils or nail polish when a woman walked up to me. She asked me where she could find some item. I honestly can't even remember what it was. I looked up, smiled politely, and explained that I didn't actually work there. I told her I was just with the inventory team and suggested she find a store employee. For me, that was a pretty normal interaction. It happened all the time. People saw us in a store, assumed we worked there, and asked for directions. Usually, they'd move on once I explained. But not this woman. Instead of heading off to find someone with an actual name tag, she turned and walked up to the coworker standing next to me. She asked him the same question. He gave her the exact same response. "Sorry, I don't work here. I'm just doing inventory." She frowned, then moved down the line. Another coworker, same question, same answer. By this point, I was watching out of the corner of my eye, trying not to laugh. She went to a 4th person, then a 5th, each of us saying the same thing while still counting products into our scanners. The thing is, we weren't subtle about what we were doing. We were literally lined up with identical shirts, identical scanning machines, and identical tasks. None of us had a name tag. None of us were doing anything close to helping customers. We were just counting, quietly, trying to get through this mountain of lipstick and nail polish. But she wasn't getting the hint. After making her way down the line and being turned away over and over, she finally snapped. She walked to the middle of the aisle, stopped dead in her tracks, and raised her voice. "Doesn't anybody work here?" Her voice carried across the aisle. A few people shopping nearby turned to look, curious about the outburst. My coworkers and I all paused just long enough to glance up at her, then went right back to our scanners. None of us said a word. We just kept counting and tapping away. In that moment, the silence said everything. We weren't going to break character, and we weren't going to pretend we could help. She stood there looking frustrated, then stormed off in some other direction. To this day, I have no idea if she ever found the thing she was searching for. The funny part is that situations like this happened all the time in different stores. Customers would get confused by us, or insist we point them to something. After a while, our boss actually gave us permission to just start pointing people in random directions if we wanted to, as long as we were polite about it. So if someone asked where the batteries were, we could just smile and say, "Oh sure, I think they're over by the sporting goods." It was harmless, and it kept us from getting stuck, explaining ourselves over and over. Looking back, that day in Fred Meyer stands out because of how extreme it was. I'll never forget the sight of that woman, standing in the middle of the cosmetics aisle, exasperated and yelling about how nobody worked there, while 6 of us in maroon shirts quietly scanned lipstick all around her, like nothing was happening. That's the end of this story. That customer probably felt like she'd walked into some kind of prank show. Imagine asking 5 different people for help and getting nowhere. It makes the whole scene sound like a comedy skit. What really makes it funny is how the workers just kept calmly counting lipstick through the whole thing. This next story is about an uncle at a city fair who ignored the rules, tried to unplug expensive equipment just to charge his phone, and then blamed the staff for not having outlets in the middle of an empty park. Back when I was a freshman, I got my very first job working as a program attendant at one of the city's big fairs. It wasn't anything glamorous, just me working shifts in a large open field that had been set up with tents, each one offering some kind of activity for families and kids. Some had crafts, some had games, some had performances. My job was mostly to help kids with whatever activity was at my assigned tent, keep things organized, and make sure the rules of the youth zone were followed. On the day this incident happened, I was stationed at a tent where kids could design and decorate little toys. We had pinwheels, folding fans, paper masks, tote bags, all sorts of simple, fun crafts that kids could personalize. It was a lighthearted, creative setup, and usually, the only problems I had were kids arguing over who got what color marker. That morning started normally. Families wandered in, kids picked out their projects, and I floated between tables, helping them with supplies. A man came in with 3 young girls, his nieces, as I later found out. He seemed fine at first, letting them choose their craft and start coloring on tote bags. I figured it would be a typical group, but then the uncle turned to me and asked if we had any chargers. I told him no, there weren't any in our area. However, I did explain that if he really needed one, the guest services building had all sorts of chargers: Apple, Android, USB, you name it. They kept those available for visitors. He groaned and said it was too far since his nieces weren't done with their activity yet. Then he asked if we at least had an outlet nearby. The problem? We were literally in the middle of a park field. There were no outlets. Not near the tents, not tucked away in corners, nowhere. I suggested he check the building near the washrooms just in case. He came back a few minutes later looking annoyed, saying there was nothing there either. At this point, he was getting desperate. So finally, I suggested he could ask the people working at the sound tent. Since they had all the equipment for the performers, that was the only place where he might find an outlet. He said, okay, told his nieces he'd be right back, and walked away. The problem was that on his way, he actually tried to unplug one of the smaller speakers near a stage. I caught him mid-action and stopped him. I reminded him that he couldn't touch the equipment. He grumbled, but kept moving toward the main sound tent. I turned back to the girls, figuring he'd return quickly. They kept working on their crafts, and I floated between them and the other families. But time dragged on, and he still hadn't come back. The nieces finished their activity, but there was no sign of their uncle. At first I wasn't too worried because the sound tent was within view, but when he still didn't return after a while, I grew concerned. The oldest niece offered to go find him. She left, but a few minutes later, she returned with one of the supervisors, and still no uncle. Apparently, she had gone to the supervisor almost in tears, asking where her uncle was. That's when the situation got serious. Rule number 1 of the youth zone was crystal clear. Kids must be supervised at all times. And this man had just abandoned them in the middle of the fair. The supervisor asked if the niece had any way to contact him, but she didn't even have his phone number. She said she could call her dad, who could try to reach him, but we all realized pretty quickly that if he was running around looking for a charger, his phone was probably already dead. All we could really do was search for him. After about an hour, yes, a full hour, we finally found him. And where was he? On the main stage. The actual stage reserved for performers like magicians, costume characters, and children's bands. And what was he doing up there? Trying to unplug one of their large speakers? Again, that's when rule number 2 came into play. Nobody is allowed on the stage unless they're a performer, staff, or an invited audience member during a show. And there wasn't even a show at the time. He had no business being up there, let alone messing with expensive sound equipment worth thousands of dollars. I couldn't hear everything the supervisor said to him, but I could see her face and body language. She was furious, hands waving, pointing at the equipment, laying down the rules. The uncle eventually came down, looking embarrassed, and quickly told his nieces it was time to leave. Later, after my shift, the supervisor filled me in. Apparently, when she confronted him, he actually complained that the park didn't have enough outlets. She just stared at him and said, "Where would we put them? It's an empty field." He got defensive and tried to argue, as if it was our fault he hadn't planned ahead and charged his phone. She pointed out that not only had he broken multiple rules, but he'd also put the fair's expensive sound equipment at risk. So, to sum it up, this guy broke 3 major rules: leaving kids unsupervised, trespassing on the main stage, and messing with equipment, all because he didn't think to charge his phone beforehand. And somehow, he thought the problem was ours, not his. That's the end of this story. It's kind of wild how something as small as a phone charger spiraled into all that. Instead of admitting he was unprepared, he blamed the fair staff, as if outlets should just magically exist in the middle of a park field. Definitely more entitled than clueless. This next story is about a chef who refused to ignore a kid's food allergy, even when the parents demanded she just make it the normal way, and risk the child's safety. I'm 33, and I work as a chef. Most of the time, I'm in restaurants, but I also take on big events like weddings, fundraisers, and galas. No matter where I'm cooking, though, the rules are the same. You never mess around with food allergies, and you never cut corners on health codes. The day this happened, I had just come off a stressful charity gala shift the night before. My feet were still aching. My brain was foggy, but there's no such thing as downtime in this job. Dinner service was already in full swing at the restaurant when a couple came in with their young son. He couldn't have been older than 9. They ordered, nothing out of the ordinary, until the mom leaned toward me and in a very casual voice said, "Just make sure his food doesn't touch ingredient." Now to her, it might have sounded casual, but For me, that was a red alert. Even if she didn't say the words food allergy with urgency, that's how we treat it every single time. So immediately, we flagged it. We sanitized everything, pulled out a clean pan, put on new gloves, and took every step we've been trained to take to prevent cross-contamination. When the plate was ready, I brought it out myself, making sure it was safe. But as soon as she looked at it, she frowned. Her voice sharpened. "This doesn't look right. That's not how I make it at home." I calmly explained, "We prepared it differently to make sure there was no cross-contamination. This way, we know it's safe." That's when she snapped, "You should just make it the normal way. If he reacts, we'll deal with it. We don't baby him at home." I just stood there, stunned. This was her child. She had just told me to keep the ingredient away from him. And now, with the plate right in front of her, she was suddenly saying the opposite? I tried to stay professional, but I couldn't help pushing back. "Ma'am, I'm not going to risk your child's health or my job. We don't take allergies lightly here." The look she gave me was like I had stepped out of line for daring to speak back. Her voice rose loud enough for nearby tables to hear. She called me lazy. She said I was heartless. Her husband chimed in, saying I was on a power trip. Meanwhile, their son just sat there, shrinking into himself, embarrassed and quiet, eyes fixed on the table. Then came the inevitable, "I want to speak to your manager." Thankfully, my manager was nearby. I explained what happened, and without hesitation, he backed me up. He told them flat out, "If you want unsafe food, you can make it yourselves at home. We won't serve it here." That shut things down pretty quickly. They left in a huff, angry and muttering, but I stood there with their words still ringing in my ears. I've been yelled at in kitchens before. It comes with the territory. But being accused of not caring about a child when I was literally protecting him, that one stung. Especially coming right after the exhaustion of a stressful gala. It just hit harder than it should have. Because at the end of the day, I cared more about that kid's safety than his own parents seemed to. That's the end of this story. This one really shows how twisted things can get when parents put pride over safety. The chef wasn't being lazy or heartless. She was the only one making sure the kid didn't end up in the hospital. Honestly, the manager shutting them down was the best part. This next story is about someone who finally set a boundary with a longtime friend who kept asking for money and got called selfish right after buying a phone they'd spent months saving for. I've known my friend since high school. Back then, we split fries at lunch, shared bus rides, and traded hand-me-downs when one of us outgrew a jacket. As adults, the friendship settled into that easy rhythm where you don't have to check in every day to know it's solid. We text about silly videos, meet for takeout when schedules line up, and wish each other luck when something big is coming up. Over the last year, though, the rhythm shifted. He started asking me for money more often. At first, it was small and forgettable. A few dollars for coffee, a little gas money, parking here and there. I didn't mind helping when I could, but the requests kept coming, and I started to feel like my wallet had become part of the friendship. Meanwhile, I'd been saving for something I really wanted, a new phone. My old one was on its last legs, battery jumping from 40% to 3 like it was taking a dive, a tiny spiderweb crack creeping across the corner, a camera that turned every night photo foggy. I'm not a big spender, so choosing to upgrade felt like a mini milestone. I did it the slow way, brought lunch from home, paused a couple of subscriptions, sold an old pair of headphones, and tossed every stray $5 into an envelope. Little by little, it added up. Last week, I finally crossed the finish line. I walked into the store with my notes and my budget and bought the phone I'd been eyeing for months. The box was slick, the screen spotless, the battery icon smugly full. I set it up that afternoon, moved my pictures, and posted a quick, happy note online. After months of saving, I treated myself. It wasn't about showing off. It was about marking the end of a small personal marathon. That same evening, my friend texted. He said he'd used his last bit of money for something else, and now his bills were due. Could I lend him enough to cover them until next month? There wasn't much detail, just urgency. He'd seen my post about the phone and added, "Since you just bought that, I figured you had it." 5 minutes earlier, I'd been admiring the clean screen and feeling that quiet pride of paying for something outright. Suddenly, I was being measured against my own purchase, like it proved I should be able to hand over cash on command. I took a breath and thought about all the times I'd said yes without thinking. I don't consider myself stingy, but I could see a pattern forming. me as the fallback plan. I also didn't want to normalize the idea that my savings were interchangeable with his emergencies. That little pile I'd built wasn't a bottomless well. It was months of boring choices so I could buy one thing for myself. I wrote back and told him the truth. I couldn't lend him the money. Not because I didn't care, but because I had just spent the savings I'd set aside for that phone, and I didn't want to turn loans into a habit. He fired back almost immediately. Wow. Selfish. I can't believe you. Then came the line that stuck. A real friend wouldn't hesitate. He pointed to the post I'd made, the shiny new phone, as if one purchase meant I'd unlocked a permanent role as his bank. I told him it wasn't fair to guilt me for finally buying something I'd saved for, and that wanting boundaries around money didn't make me heartless. It just meant I knew my limits. I tried to offer alternatives. I said I could help him call the utility company to ask about payment plans, or sit down and go through a budget, or look at weekend side gigs. I said if he needed groceries, I could pick up basics to get him through the week. Cash, though, I wasn't comfortable with that. The conversation didn't land the way I hoped. He told me I didn't understand what it's like to struggle, that I was choosing a phone over a friend, and then he went quiet. He stopped responding entirely. The next day, a mutual friend checked in asking if we were okay. Apparently, he'd vented to a few people about how I refused to help when I clearly had the money. I repeated what I'd told him. I had saved for months for one purchase. I had already spent it, and I wasn't going to start the cycle of loans. It felt strange explaining my private choices to others, but I didn't want the story to twist into something it wasn't. Boundaries aren't indifference. They're guardrails for relationships you actually want to keep. If I'm honest, part of me did feel bad. He is struggling. I know what a tight month feels like. The mental math, the small panic, the way you stretch pantry dinners as far as they go. Saying no to someone standing in that same place isn't fun. But I kept circling back to the difference between a one-off emergency and a pattern. An emergency is your car dying the week before rent is due, or a prescription suddenly costing double. A pattern is a new request every few weeks, plus a shrug about when or whether it'll be paid back. There's another practical piece I can't ignore. Lending money shifts the shape of a friendship. It turns a hangout into an accounting session. You start doing math in your head. How much is out, how long it's been, whether it's okay to bring it up. And if you do bring it up, will it land as judgment? I've been down that road once before with him, when a quick spot stretched into months of awkward reminders and apologetic delays before it was finally repaid. We patched things up afterward, but the residue of that dynamic never fully went away. I didn't want to repaint the same scene. I kept thinking about the phone, too. Not as an object, but as a symbol of the energy it took to save. I didn't go into debt for it. I didn't flash it around. I made a plan, stuck to it, and followed through. It felt like a small act of taking care of myself, the way you might treat yourself to new running shoes after training for a race. Saying no to a loan right after that wasn't punishment. It was me protecting a boundary I'd been practicing for months. You can be generous without erasing yourself. To double-check I wasn't being unfair, I ran a little thought experiment. If he had asked for a ride to work, I would have driven him. If he had needed help moving, I would have shown up. If he had told me there was a true emergency, a medical bill due that day, a shut-off notice taped to the door, I would have rallied, asked other friends to chip in, and called around for resources. I'm not cold, but what he asked for wasn't a specific crisis. It was another withdrawal from the bank of me with no plan attached. I sent one more message. I told him I cared about him and the friendship, and that I'd be glad to help in non-cash ways. Rides, meals, resume edits, job leads, calls to set up payment plans. But I wasn't going to loan money. I said if that made me a bad friend in his eyes, I couldn't control that. But I wasn't going to apologize for having a boundary. He left it on read. The silence settled in like a heavy coat. I don't know what happens next. Maybe he'll cool off and we'll talk it through. Maybe he'll stay angry for a while. I can't manage his feelings, and I can't unbuy my phone to prove a point. What I can do is keep being clear about what I can and can't give. Friendship isn't measured by how quickly you open your wallet. It's measured by how steadily you show up without keeping score. I've shown up a lot. I'll keep showing up, just not as a lender. And I'm done feeling guilty for finally spending money I worked hard to save. That's where the story ends. This leaves a mark because money can twist a friendship fast. Setting a boundary after months of saving isn't selfish. It's basic self-respect. If someone ties your worth to your wallet, the boundary probably needed to be there a long time ago. This next story is about a woman who doesn't want her sister-in-law staying over Christmas after years of conflict and criticism. I'll start with some background, so it makes sense. My relationship with my sister-in-law has never been good. From the very beginning, we've butted heads on just about everything. Whenever we've gone on family trips or spent holidays together, it almost always ended up being unpleasant. She's been rude to me, dismissive, and disrespectful more times than I can count. The part that hurts the most is her attitude about her own mother, my mother-in-law. My husband and I are the ones who stepped up to take care of her. She has early onset Alzheimer's, and when her condition worsened, we moved her into our city so she could live with us full time. For the past 3 years, we've been her around-the-clock caregivers. It's exhausting at times, but I've never minded doing it because she deserves love and care. What bothers me is that my sister-in-law has never helped. Not financially, not with her time, not in any way. Whenever we've traveled as a family, she wouldn't step up to help with her mom. My husband and I still ended up being the ones responsible, even on trips that were supposed to be family vacations. And then, on top of not helping, she constantly criticizes us. She'll question her mother's condition, tell us we should just put her in a nursing home, or make comments about how we're not caring for her properly. It's maddening. We're the ones doing all the work, giving her mother a safe and comfortable life, and instead of showing appreciation, she nitpicks and critiques. It's not just insulting, it's offensive. I don't mind being the caregiver, but I do mind being attacked for it. What makes it harder is that when these conflicts happen, my husband doesn't step in. He doesn't mediate, he doesn't defend me. He just lets it play out, and I'm left standing there on my own. That brings me to now. When my sister-in-law comes to town to see her mother, my husband always wants to let her stay at our house. The last time, I put my foot down and said no. I was 5 months pregnant, and at the same time my own mom had just been diagnosed with terminal cancer. My plate was beyond full, and I couldn't handle her being in my space on top of everything else. She ended up not staying with us that time, and honestly, that visit went a lot smoother. Now she wants to come again for Christmas. My husband wants to let her stay here, and this time I feel even more nervous about it. By the time she visits, I'll have just had a baby, 6 weeks old at that point. I'll be postpartum, still adjusting to being a new mom, still grieving and supporting my own family through my mother's cancer, and still providing full-time care for my mother-in-law. The idea of having someone in the house who has a history of disrespecting me, criticizing me, and creating conflict feels unbearable. I want to be protective of my mental health and my new little family. I can't imagine being trapped in my own home with her, especially knowing my husband won't back me up if things go south. That fear alone makes me feel like saying no is the only option. I've thought it through. I'm not trying to shut her out of our lives completely. I'm happy to spend time with her when she visits. She can take her mom out as much as she likes. She can meet the baby, hold the baby, try to start fresh with me if she wants to. But I don't want her living under my roof. Not when the stakes are this high and I'm this vulnerable. And it's not like she doesn't have options. She has plenty of money and could easily stay at a hotel nearby. It wouldn't be a hardship for her at all. The truth is, I just want to protect my own peace, my home, and my baby during a very overwhelming time. That's the end of this story. This one really shows how draining family dynamics can get when someone never helps but still criticizes. What stood out most to me is how much the storyteller is already carrying. Pregnancy, caring for her sick mom, caring for her mother-in-law, and then still being expected to host. That's a lot on anyone's shoulders. I think anyone would feel protective of their own space in that situation, especially with a newborn in the picture. This next story is about someone who discovered a hidden, handwritten love letter tucked inside a library book. Last week, I was wandering through my local library. I wasn't looking for anything intense or fast-paced. I just wanted something quiet, something reflective, a book I could sink into while the world slowed down a little. I drifted through the shelves until I spotted A Man Called Ova. I'd heard plenty about it, but never actually picked it up before. It felt like the right choice for that kind of mood. I found a spot to sit, cracked the book open, and started reading. It was just what I wanted. Steady, thoughtful, a story with weight but also heart. Then, halfway through, something unexpected happened. A folded piece of paper slipped out from between the pages and floated onto my lap. At first I thought it was just a receipt, or maybe one of those little notes librarians sometimes leave behind. But no, this was different. The paper was yellow, lined like the kind from old school notebooks. It had been folded carefully and tucked away like a secret. I froze for a second, debating what to do. Technically, I probably should have walked it straight up to the front desk, but curiosity won out. I opened it. The date at the top stopped me in my tracks. May 14th, 1999. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, like whoever wrote it took their time to get each curve of each letter just right. It wasn't rushed or messy. The letter was addressed to someone named Eli, but the writer hadn't signed their full name. Just a single initial, R. The words started off simple, almost nostalgic. R wrote about how they and Eli had been best friends since middle school. They mentioned summers spent riding bikes, talking for hours about nothing in particular, climbing up to the roof of a garage just to sit under the stars. You could feel the warmth in the memories, the way they'd been carried close to the heart for years. But then, slowly, the letter shifted. It wasn't just about friendship anymore. It became softer, more vulnerable. It was a love letter. R admitted they were scared. Scared of ruining what they already had. Scared Eli wouldn't feel the same way. Scared of the time, the place, and of how people might react if they knew. And then, without any resolution, the letter just ended. No goodbye, no signature, just silence. I must have read that letter 3 times in the library chair. Each time it hit a little harder. There was something so intimate about it, so specific and personal, but at the same time, it felt universal. Who hasn't had something they were too afraid to say? Who hasn't wanted to confess a feeling, but held back out of fear? I sat there for a while just holding it. Part of me wanted to tuck it right back into the pages of the book, like it belonged there and should stay hidden. But another part of me couldn't do it. It didn't feel right to leave it there for anyone else to casually flip past. Eventually, I carried it up to the front desk. I explained to the librarian that I'd found it inside a man called Ova. She glanced at it, her expression softening. "This book hasn't been checked out in years," she said quietly, almost like she was talking to herself more than to me. I walked out of the library still thinking about it. I don't know who R and Eli are, or were. I don't know if Eli ever learned the truth about how R felt. I don't know if the words on that yellow paper ever made it to the person they were meant for. But I hope, in some way, things turned out okay. That maybe Eli did feel the same. Or that even if nothing happened between them, R found some kind of peace just by writing the letter. And if by some impossible twist of fate, Eli ever stumbles across this story, maybe check your old library books. Someone loved you once. That's where the story ends. There's something haunting about finding a piece of someone's heart tucked away in a book. It makes you think about how many moments like that get lost in time, never reaching the person they were meant for. What really stuck with me is how both fragile and powerful those words were, even decades later. It's wild how a small letter can make you pause and feel connected to strangers you'll never meet. This next story is about a young worker dealing with a new coworker whose vaping, harsh comments, and attitude are making the whole kitchen uncomfortable. A few weeks ago, my job held a hiring event, and that's when we brought in a new coworker. She's 37 and started working morning shifts in the kitchen with me. At first I thought things might go smoothly because she actually picked up the job really fast. She's sharp, efficient, and clearly knows how to handle the basics. From a technical standpoint, she's good at what she does. But as the days went on, I started noticing things that made me genuinely uncomfortable. On what I think was only her second shift, I looked over and saw her vaping, right there in the kitchen. To me, that was a big red flag. It's not that I care what people do on their own time, but there are certain lines that shouldn't be crossed. First of all, I'm 18. I legally shouldn't even be around that, and I don't want to inhale it either. Second, this was a kitchen. There's food everywhere, people eating, and a standard of cleanliness we're supposed to follow. Third, we're in a public building. She literally works here. If she wanted to vape, she could just step outside. But instead, she was casually doing it right next to me like it was normal. That was just the start. As the weeks went on, she also started getting kind of bossy with other coworkers. I get that people make mistakes. A lot of us are still new, and it takes time to learn everything. But instead of being patient or even just offering to help, she started barking at people. It gave off this energy like she thought she was already running the place, even though she just got here. About a week ago, I was telling her about a mistake someone made on the closing shift. It wasn't a huge deal, just one of those small errors you mentioned so it doesn't happen again. But her response floored me. She said, and I quote, "Forget those frickin' FS." I froze. I didn't even know what to say. I just went silent because I suddenly realized this might not be a safe person to be around. I'm queer, and so are some of my coworkers. To hear someone throw that out so casually in a place where I have to spend hours working alongside them, it shook me. Then today, she walked in, and the first thing she said was, "I'm so hungover right now." I kind of laughed it off in the moment, but inside I was thinking, really? You're announcing that on the job? It just added to this growing list of reasons why I'm uneasy around her. And here's where I'm stuck. On one hand, she's clearly good at the job itself. She picked up the task quickly, and I can tell she's competent in the work. On the other hand, the vaping in the kitchen, the bossy attitude, the slurs she used, and the comments about being hungover, all of that has made me and others uncomfortable. I want to say something, but I'm scared. What if she figures out it was me? What if she decides she hates me or makes things worse? I don't want to get her in trouble just for the sake of it, but I also don't want to sit back while she makes the workplace feel unsafe and uncomfortable. Right now, I feel caught in the middle, torn between staying quiet or speaking up, not knowing which option will end up causing less damage. That story stops there. This one really shows how tricky it can be when a new coworker is both skilled and disruptive at the same time. The hardest part is feeling stuck between not wanting drama and not wanting to stay quiet. It's a tough spot, especially when you're younger and working around someone older who should know better. Sometimes the problem isn't about the work itself, but about how the atmosphere changes when one person crosses too many lines. This next story is about a fairground breakup where a corn dog, a butter sculpture, and one poorly timed speech collide in a messy split. County Fair night had that warm, sticky air that feels like caramel on the skin, the kind that clings to clothes and turns every light bulb into a little halo. We rolled in just before sunset, joking about how we were suddenly outdoorsy because we could see grass between the gravel and the funnel cake stand. It felt easy, the kind of evening that makes a person believe in small-town magic. String lights, dusty boots, and music bleeding out of tinny speakers near the Ferris wheel. We started with food because that's the fair's real main event. He pointed at the first stand and grinned. Corn dogs. So we stood in line, heat rising off the fryer, watching batter-dipped everything come out golden and dripping. I went all in on a lemonade the size of a small aquarium, the kind served in a cup with a ridiculous plastic straw that arches like a question mark. He went for the corn dog with the extra mustard, then talked me into curly fries that rustled like straw in the paper boat. We wandered, tried to act like we weren't already a little winded from the walk from the parking lot, and poked fun at ourselves for pretending we were the type to ride the big swings without looking down. At first, the jokes came easy. He pointed out a butter sculpture that looked suspiciously like Elvis, hip-cocked, curl-perfect, a sheen that caught the lamplight. We laughed and I took a photo, angled just right so the glow looked almost holy. Every smell tried to claim the moment: kettle corn, hot oil, hay, a little whiff of animals from the show barn. Music floated over from a cover band doing old classics, and I recognized a chorus or two without placing the song. It was the kind of night where everything blends: sugar on the tongue, grit under shoes, colored bulbs humming overhead. We walked past the game alley, where the barkers call out soft deals that somehow sound like challenges. He tossed a couple of rings at milk bottles, and I clapped, even though the rings bounced every time and the bottles never rattled. I tried to win a stuffed bear by popping balloons with dull darts. The worker gave me a pity smile and one extra throw that still sailed wide. We kept moving, bumping shoulders, sharing the curly fries down to the smallest oniony curls, licking salt from our fingers like it was part of the ritual. It was halfway through his corn dog that the air changed. Not the weather, just us. A shift small enough to feel like a pause in the song. He set his jaw like a person who just remembered a dentist appointment. Then he looked at me, and it wasn't the goofy smile from 5 minutes before. He said, "We need to talk." Fairground noise doesn't stop for statements like that. Somewhere, a kid shriek-laughed on a spinning ride. Someone shouted, "Win a goldfish." A generator coughed. My lemonade felt suddenly heavy in my hand, the cup sweating hard enough to make my palms slick. I tried to find a quiet spot with my eyes, but everything was bright and loud and spinning. He started with the classic lines. "We're just in different places." He held the stick like a baton that might explain the rest if he waved it right. "You want certain things. I think I want different things. Words that feel like they belong in a hallway or a parked car, not in front of a statue of butter with sideburns, not while powdered sugar floats through the air like gentle snow." To give an idea of how surreal it felt, there I was 2 feet from him, trying not to cry, staring at a food stand menu where everything was spelled out in all caps, like it could shout sense into the moment. Funnel cake, elephant ear, corn dogs, lemonade. The woman at the counter behind him sprinkled sugar on a fresh cake, and the cloud drifted between us like a stage effect I hadn't asked for. He tried to keep going, but the sentences stumbled. "You're great. That kind of talk always tries to be kind and always lands sideways." I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, fixed my eyes on the little constellation of grease spots on the paper under his corn dog, and inhaled slow until the lemon acid cut through the heat. I didn't trust my voice, so I didn't use it. I let the fare speak for me. The tinny guitar, the laughter, the grind of a ride ratcheting up, up, up. He kept talking, and I let him. Sometimes silence is the only reply that isn't a trap. Then came the moment that cracked me up later, after the sting dulled. He held out the last half of his funnel cake like a peace offering. Powdered sugar drifted off in little ghosts. "Do you want the rest?" he asked, almost gentle, eyes apologetic, voice soft like napkins. I took it because some things simply make sense. Heartbreak fades. Sugar is reliable. The plate felt warm through the paper, and I pinched off a corner that crunched before it melted, and that helped. Not to fix anything big, but to give the hand something to do besides tremble. We stood there in the glow of food stall bulbs, the conversation pausing in strange places, all the big words already spent. He shifted, uncertain, as if waiting for me to yell or cry or announce a verdict. I wasn't ready to do any of that in front of Elvis, so I wiped sugar on my fingers and said the simplest truth available. "Okay." Not agreement, not approval, just the word that unlocks the next step: move. After a few long beats, we drifted apart inside the crowd. No dramatic exit, no running footsteps, just 2 people becoming atoms again, bumping into strangers with plastic cups and paper plates, letting the fare absorb the leftover noise. The music changed. The ride kept spinning. The world didn't know to stop. I wandered without a plan. Funnel cake in one hand, lemonade in the other, sticky enough to feel like a kid again. After a while, the ache in my chest made room for something else. The lights looked less like glare and more like confetti. The band hit a chorus I actually knew, and I hummed along under my breath. I walked past the Butter Elvis one more time and laughed. It felt silly and perfect. I took a breath that tasted like fried dough and citrus, wiped sugar off my shirt, and kept going. Later, the Ferris wheel called me over like a lighthouse. The line moved slow. I watched the gondolas lift and circle, tiny couples and families rising and sinking in smooth loops. When it was my turn, I stepped in alone, sat back, and let the sky tilt. The fare shrank to a toy set, dots of light, lines of color, the sound bending into one big hush. Up at the top, for a second, the car paused and I felt weightless, not from the height, but from the idea that slammed down a minute before. I let the breeze slap at the sugar on my lips. I let my shoulders drop. I let the word "okay" settle into something stronger. When my feet touched ground again, I picked a little more sugar off the paper and laughed at how ridiculous and sweet and utterly human the whole night had been. I tossed the empty cup, brushed my hands clean, and walked out sticky, single, and, weirdly, lighter. Not because this was the plan, because sometimes plans crack open and let something simple through, like the taste of powdered sugar refusing to be ruined. That's where the story ends. Breakups that happen in the brightest places hit different, but there's a tiny comfort in all that noise and light. The Butter Elvis cameo is honestly unforgettable. Funnel cake as a consolation prize feels oddly perfect, like the fare knew what it was doing. Sometimes the exit isn't dramatic. It's just a quiet, Okay. And that's enough to keep walking. This next story is about a low-key night out that spirals into a confrontation when a kid grabs a stranger's knitting yarn and a defensive parent turns it into a scene. The plan for the night was simple. My sister invited me to a musical evening at a local pizzeria where her boyfriend was playing, and I said yes immediately. I love live music, but I'm the kind of person who needs a little something to do with my hands when the activity is mostly sitting and listening. So I packed a small project bag. Nothing dramatic, just 3 skeins of yarn that fit neatly in the bottom, and the one I'd be working with tucked on top. The yarn was set aside for a specific pattern I'd been excited about, counted and planned down to the last meter. We got there a little early. The pizzeria had that warm, cozy buzz, pizza ovens humming, the faint scorched sweet smell of crust, and a mix of conversation under the ripple of tuning notes. We found a table off to the side of the small stage. The lighting was soft, the kind that turns everything a little golden. I slid my bag under the chair, pulled out my needles, and started into the easy rhythm of the first section. Knit, knit, purl. Slide, breathe, listen. It was nice. The music started, gentle, bright, and I felt myself settle. There were families around us, which I didn't mind. Kids were wiggling in their seats, sharing slices, sneaking sips of soda. Every so often, a little pair of sneakers would hurry by toward the bathroom or the arcade machine against the wall. I kept my yarn in my lap, the working skein feeding smooth as I counted repeats in my head. The other skeins stayed zipped in the bag. At least that's what I thought. After a while, the music pulled me in. My stitch count stayed steady, and my eyes relaxed, tracking the pattern almost on muscle memory. I wasn't guarding the bag. I didn't think I needed to. And then, in that casual sweep people do, phone, napkin, water, bag, I glanced down. Something in my stomach dropped. The bag zipper was open, and one of the skeins that should have been nestled there was gone. I looked around. At first, I didn't even see yarn, just shoes and chair legs and the glint of crumbs. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw it. My missing skein had been pulled out, trailed, and rolled. It slithered from under our table, looped around a chair leg, and disappeared toward the next table where a little tangle of color sat mashed into the floor. The strand had picked up everything on its trip: dust, gray fuzz, hair, and a fresh coat of pizza crumb confetti. My heart sank in that quiet way that feels heavy rather than loud. I followed the trail with my eyes and then turned. A small boy, maybe 4 or 5, sat in the next chair over, looking at the mess like it was a fascinating new creature. He still had a bit of the yarn in his hand. I took a breath, another breath, and I leaned down to his level so my voice wouldn't carry. I asked, as calmly as I could, "Hey, did you take that yarn out of my bag?" He looked at me and nodded. Simple. Straightforward. The kind of honest a little kid has before they learn to decorate answers. I kept my voice steady and said, "That yarn is mine. It came from my bag. Please don't go through other people's things." I added something I hoped would make sense to him. That was one of my toys, and now it's ruined, and I'm really upset. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't snap, but I was absolutely shaking. Part frustration, part disappointment, at the thought of losing a planned skein to the restaurant floor. That was the moment his mother turned toward me. She was already frowning. The first words out of her mouth came out sharp. She told me I had no business bringing yarn to a restaurant. She said I was being entitled for speaking to her child. She said children were going to act like children, and the rest of the world should be patient. The room didn't go quiet, but it felt like it did. The music kept playing, the oven kept roaring, but my attention tunneled right into that one corner of air between the 3 of us. I tried to explain, still in a regular tone, that the skein had been in my bag, not on the table, that it was counted for a project, that it was now covered in whatever lives on a restaurant floor. I mentioned that I'd asked her son a question, and he had said he did take it. The more I explained, the more her face tightened. She didn't want reasons. She wanted me to back away. She told me again that I shouldn't have brought knitting, that the world needed to make room for kids, and that my feelings were over the top. For a second, I thought about digging in, about laying out the quiet math of it, that my bag is not a community toy box. That curiosity doesn't erase boundaries, that I hadn't scolded in a way that would embarrass him. I had just named what happened and asked for it to stop, But standing there with a ruined skein threading across tile like a sad pastel river, I realized the conversation wasn't going to land anywhere useful. So I shifted gears. I bent down, gathered what strands I could, and wound them into a little defeated lump. The fibers were matted from dust and grit, and there was no saving that texture. The more I touched it, the clearer it got. This one was done. I tucked the lump into a spare bag I used for scraps, zipped my main bag completely, and slid it to the safe side of my chair. My hands needed something to do, so I took a slow drink of water and counted to 10 in my head, steady as a metronome. My sister put a gentle hand on my arm, a small anchor, and asked if I wanted to step outside. I didn't. I wanted to enjoy the music I'd come to hear and finish the row I was on. So I sat back down, refound my place in the pattern, and let my needles do the calming I couldn't quite do by thinking. Knit, knit, purl. The stage lights made a soft cone. The melody threaded through the room. The night moved on. I finished the section I'd planned to finish. I kept my project bag fully zipped, and I let the rest of the evening be quiet for me. No more conversation than necessary, no extra commentary, just a steady rhythm and a decision to protect what I had left. On the way home, I mentally reordered what I'd need to replace and when I could swing it. The yarn had been meant for something I was genuinely excited about. That stung, but the project could wait, and my piece for the night didn't have to go with it. Looking back on it now, I'm glad I kept my words measured in the moment. I'm also allowed to admit I was really upset and not pretend I wasn't. Both of those things can be true at the same time. That story wraps up here. Public spaces get interesting when personal boundaries meet totally different expectations. The whole scene says a lot about how fast a small moment can snowball. Handwork at shows and concerts is such a calm habit, and it's wild how quickly that calm can get rattled. The music trying to smooth things over in the background feels almost cinematic, like the soundtrack didn't get the memo. This next story is about a teenager who, in the middle of one of their hardest days, suddenly realized their teacher saw them as more than just another student. Last week was rough. Honestly, it felt like everything decided to fall apart all at once. The morning started with me flunking my driver's test, which already set the tone for the rest of the day. I walked out of that testing center feeling like a total failure, fighting back frustration and wondering how I was ever going to pass. On top of that, I had a fight with my best friend that left me feeling off balance. By the time I dragged myself into AP Chemistry, I was already completely drained. Chemistry is one of those classes that eats away at me even on good days. Balancing equations feels like translating some impossible language, and when I'm distracted, it's even worse. That day, I sat at my desk just trying to keep my head above water, telling myself to at least look like I was paying attention. I thought if I stayed quiet and didn't draw attention to myself, the day would just end without more damage. But when the bell rang, my teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, asked me to stay after class. My stomach dropped. I figured she was about to tell me off for zoning out, or maybe she'd noticed my grades slipping. I braced myself for some lecture I didn't have the energy to handle. Instead, she looked at me carefully and just said, "Hey, are you all right? You're acting different today." That simple question hit me harder than I expected. It was like a crack in a wall I'd been holding up all day. I broke down crying, right there in the classroom, in front of a teacher I'd only ever seen as this professional figure who handed out assignments and wrote grades on tests. I felt embarrassed at first, but she didn't make it weird. She didn't tell me to toughen up or act like my problems weren't real. She just quietly handed me a box of tissues and waited. And then she shared something that completely shifted how I saw her. She told me that when she was my age, she failed her driver's test not once, not twice, but 3 times. She said she cried in the parking lot every single time. Hearing that floored me. I had never even considered that teachers had stories like mine. Failures, disappointments, moments where they felt small. We ended up talking for nearly 20 minutes, but not about school or homework or college. We talked about life. She told me about her own teenage years and how chaotic they felt. She admitted there was a point in her master's program where she nearly dropped out because she didn't feel smart enough. She even said that to this day, she still calls her mom on bad days. It was like she pulled back the curtain and let me see the real person behind the teacher role. That conversation completely rewired how I thought about her. Up until then, I honestly thought teachers were kind of like machines, grading papers, assigning projects, existing in this bubble that didn't touch real life. But listening to her open up made me realize she chose to spend her days with kids like me, trying to help us through not just academics, but also the mess of being a teenager. Later that evening, I got a text from her just checking in to see if I was okay. I didn't even know teachers did that, but it made me feel like she truly cared. Not because it was her job, but because she wanted to. And in that moment, Mrs. Rodriguez stopped being just my chemistry teacher. She became someone real to me. Someone I respected not just for teaching science, but for being human in a way I didn't expect. That's the end of this story. Moments like that really stick. It's wild how just one honest conversation can flip the way someone's seen. Teachers usually feel so distant, but when they let their guard down, they suddenly become people who've been through the same messy stuff. That shift can be small, but it leaves a mark. This next story is about a sibling standoff where one brother keeps accidentally eating someone else's food until a sabotaged ice cream pint turns the fridge into a quiet battleground. My brother and I share a small place with one medium fridge, one freezer, and exactly zero patience when it comes to leftovers. He's got this talent for not noticing labels, Sharpie warnings, or the fact that a half-eaten bag of chips is clearly not up for grabs. If I left a slice of pizza in a box with my name on it, it's somehow teleported into his stomach by the next morning. If I opened a soda, took 2 sips, and set it on the top shelf, I'd find it mysteriously empty and back in the fridge like a little practical joke. At first I tried the obvious fixes. I started writing my name bigger. Then I added dates. Then I started taping sticky notes with little messages like, hands off, or not for you, or the very calm, don't eat this please. He'd still accidentally take it. Whenever I confronted him, he would shrug and say, oh man, I thought it was mine. Like our kitchen had some kind of leftover roulette. He always looked a little too satisfied while saying it, like he knew exactly what he did and was proud of himself. I told myself I'd let it go, but the list of tiny losses kept getting longer. The last slice of buffalo chicken pizza I was saving for lunch, gone. A perfect apple, crisp and cold and just washed, vanished. A half bag of the good kettle chips that somehow cost as much as rent, crumbs. It was like living with a very polite raccoon that occasionally said sorry with a mouthful of food. I knew he had a weak spot though. He has a favorite pint of ice cream, salted caramel with fudge swirls, that he treats like a precious treasure. If it goes on sale, he buys one. Just one. It lives in the very back corner of the freezer, behind a bag of frozen peas and a stiff, frosty pack of tortillas nobody remembers buying. He doesn't share it. He would offer me literally anything else. Before he offered me a spoonful of that pint. He protects it like it's a savings account. One night, I watched him sneak it into the freezer after a grocery run. He slid the pint behind the peas and tapped the lid down twice, like he was sealing a vault. He went to bed early, and I just sat there on the couch thinking about all the food I had lost to oops. I wanted a response that didn't start a fight, didn't escalate into a yelling match, and didn't involve taking something he already paid for. I wanted something small, reversible, and memorable. So I waited until the house was quiet. Then I padded into the kitchen, pulled open the freezer, and gently tugged his pint free from its fortifications. The lid popped off with that soft ice cream sound, and the surface inside looked like a glossy caramel planet. I let it sit on the counter for a few minutes, just enough to soften. Then I took a spoon, a bottle of very salty soy sauce, and a small hot sauce we keep for emergency noodle nights. I added a tablespoon of soy sauce and a generous dash of hot sauce, then stirred slowly so the swirls looked natural. The smell was something. Not enough to notice from a distance, but definitely noticeable if the spoon hit the mouth. I smoothed the top with the back of the spoon and popped the lid back on. Back behind the peas it went. The next day moved along like any other. I made a point to act normal, to keep a straight face, and to not hover in the kitchen like a cartoon villain. In the late afternoon, I heard the freezer door creak open. My brother sighed, his happy ice cream sigh, the one he does when he thinks he's about to be alone with his favorite dessert. I stayed in the living room, flipping channels very casually and pretending to be absorbed in whatever was on. There was the soft pop of the lid, a pause, then a small metallic clink of a spoon scooping, another pause, and then a sound I had never heard him make before. Half cough, half gag, and fully confused. "What in the world is this?" he called from the kitchen. I stood up and walked in. keeping my face as calm as possible. He held the pint like it had insulted him. His eyes were watering a little. It tastes like soy sauce. And, something else. What's wrong with this? I leaned in, looked at the pint, and tilted my head. Bad batch? I said, like I had never heard of such a thing. Like the world had gone strange. He took another cautious try, just to make sure the first bite wasn't a fluke. That second spoonful hit harder. He put the lid back on and set the pint down like it had personally betrayed him. Then he started scraping the mess into the trash, scooping and muttering about quality control and how companies don't make things the way they used to. He even checked the sell-by date and the label, like the answer would be printed there. Meanwhile, I stood there offering neutral commentary. Weird, I said. Maybe they stored it next to something in the warehouse. He nodded like that was a theory worth investigating and kept grumbling while he threw it away. After that, nothing more was said. But an interesting shift happened in our kitchen. My food suddenly stayed where I put it. The half-eaten chips were exactly as half-eaten as I left them. The little triangle of leftover pizza, untouched. Even my soda, my clearly labeled soda, sat there all day and greeted me when I got home. He never accused me of anything, and I never confessed. We just carried on like two diplomats who had signed a treaty without talking about it. I didn't need to sabotage anything else. Once was enough. The memory of that pint, the one that tasted like the ocean collided with a chili pepper, seemed to live in his head rent-free. If I caught him glancing at my labeled leftovers, he'd pull his eyes away like he'd looked at the sun. And when he bought his next ice cream pint, he stored it in the front of the freezer like a normal person. No more secret vault, no more treasure hoard, just frozen dessert and boundaries. It wasn't revenge so much as a gentle nudge, a reminder that if someone insists on ignoring lines, the lines can be painted in very bright colors. My snacks survived. His pride survived. The freezer survived. And peace fell over our kitchen like a little snowfall of powdered sugar, without the soy sauce. That's where the story ends. Petty justice like this is oddly satisfying, especially when it convinces someone to respect simple boundaries. The part that lands hardest is how small the fix was compared to the weeks of frustration. Sometimes one careful push changes a whole routine, and hey, snack security restored feels like a tiny win worth celebrating. This next story is about a wife who discovered her husband secretly applied for jobs in California, even though they had agreed to wait until their debts were paid off. So for a little context, my husband and I took a trip to California last October. He's originally from there and still has family in the area. I've always liked the state too, so it's not like I'm against living there someday. But from the start, I've been very clear. Before we make such a big move, we need to pay off our cars and clear up the small loans hanging over us. Basically, I wanted us to be debt-free before uprooting our lives. A couple months before that trip, he asked how I'd feel if he applied to some jobs down there. I told him again the same thing I'd been saying. We need to handle our financial responsibilities first. He seemed to agree every time we talked about it. On top of that, the company he already works for has a branch in California, so if he really wanted to transfer later, that option was there. Fast forward to this month. We take another week-long trip to California, and it's a good trip overall. When we get home, the very next day, I overhear him on the phone with a friend. His friend casually asks, "So how did that interview go?" And my stomach just dropped. Interview? What interview? I hadn't heard a single word about him applying anywhere, and as far as I knew, he was secure in his current job. The moment the word interview came out, he quickly took the call off speaker and made sure I couldn't hear anything else. That alone set off alarms in my head. I didn't push it right away, but the thought just kept nagging me. A few days later, I looked through his phone to see if I could find anything. Nothing on Indeed. No job applications saved. No reminders. No emails. Except, I noticed there was a 3-day gap where all of his emails had been deleted. Those exact 3 days lined up with when this supposed interview was supposed to have happened. The next morning, I asked him about it directly. That's when he told me his version of events. He said the interview was supposed to be a surprise for me. The plan, according to him, was that if he got the job, he could spring it on me like, "Well, surprise, we can actually move here now because I already have a job lined up." He claimed the date had been switched last minute to the same day we left California, so he couldn't actually attend. But hearing that didn't make me feel good. It made me feel betrayed. Because to set that surprise up, he had to delete emails, hide things, and at some point he would have needed to lie straight to my face about where he was going. And beyond all that, we had agreed mutually that we wouldn't even consider moving until our debts were paid off. I tried to explain all this to him calmly. I told him how disrespected I felt, how it looked like he went behind my back, and how it seemed like he was prioritizing his own plan instead of the one we had built together. His reaction was explosive. He shouted at me, saying things like, "Oh, my bad for trying to get a better job and give us a better life. My bad for wanting to surprise you with more money." He just kept repeating that line over and over, like I was being ungrateful for him even trying. This morning, the argument flared up again. I told him again why I felt the way I did. That's when he dropped the line that hit me the hardest. He said, "You could tell anybody and they'd agree with me. Sure, your friends might side with you, but anyone else would think you're being dramatic and overreacting. And now, here I am, second-guessing myself and wondering if I'm really overreacting or if it actually was crossing a line for him to do all of this behind my back." That's where this story finishes. That's such a frustrating spot to be in because it's less about the job and more about the trust that got shaken. The whole surprise excuse feels flimsy when hiding things and deleting emails was involved. Arguments that circle back to yelling usually end up leaving both people feeling unheard. And when someone insists that everyone would agree with me, it kind of says they're not willing to even hear another perspective. This next story is about someone who accidentally wandered into the wrong event and ended up crashing a wedding reception. A couple weeks ago, I got invited to my friend's cousin's engagement party. It was being held at this event hall I'd never been to before, so when I showed up, I just followed the sound of music and walked into the first big room that looked like the right place. Right away, people started greeting me like I belonged there. Folks were smiling, giving me hugs, handing me drinks, and asking how I knew the couple. My brain completely froze, and without thinking, I just said, "college." That one simple word seemed to satisfy everyone because they all nodded like it made perfect sense. After a few minutes though, I started noticing something felt a little off. The decorations were way more elaborate than I was expecting. The lighting, the flowers, the suits, the dresses. It all seemed a bit too much for just an engagement party. But everyone was treating me like family, so I didn't question it too hard. Then came the moment of truth. As I sat at a table, one older guy leaned over, introduced himself as someone's uncle, and started sharing family stories like we were long-lost relatives. He talked about vacations, old arguments, and even let a few secrets slip. Meanwhile, I just nodded and laughed along like I'd been part of this family my whole life. That's when it hit me. I wasn't at an engagement party. I was smack in the middle of an actual wedding reception. Two strangers had just gotten married, and somehow, I had become part of their big day. At that point, though, it felt way too late to correct anyone. I already had food in front of me and a drink in hand, so I just decided to roll with it. And honestly, the food was incredible. The highlight, though, was the cake. Someone came over, pressed a plate into my hands, and told me I had to try Aunt Linda's famous recipe. I had never heard of Aunt Linda in my entire life, but I can confirm she knows how to bake. That cake was unreal. I ended up staying longer than I should have, just blending into the background. I laughed, I ate, I even clapped during the speeches like I belonged there. The only thing I avoided was getting too close to the bride and groom, because I had no clue what to say if they asked who I was. Eventually, I decided I needed to make my exit before things got awkward. Right before the bouquet toss, I slipped out as quietly as I could. Then I finally found the real engagement party, which was happening in the hall next door. When I walked in, my friend asked why I was late, and I just shrugged and said, "Traffic." No way was I admitting I had just been celebrating with a totally different family. To this day, I can't help but laugh when I think about it. Somewhere out there, a married couple probably has a set of wedding photos with me in the background. Just a random stranger holding a slice of cake and trying to look like I belonged. That's the end of this story. Honestly, that sounds like the kind of mix-up that becomes a core memory. Imagine flipping through wedding photos years later and seeing a stranger casually chilling with cake. It's kind of funny how easily someone can blend into a family gathering when everyone's in a good mood. The best part is they'll probably never know, unless one of those relatives points out, "Hey, who even was that guy?" This next story is about a couple settling into their new apartment, only to find themselves dealing with a neighbor whose nonstop blasting music turns daily life into chaos. My fiance and I moved into our new apartment on August 22nd, and right from the moment we got the keys, things started going downhill. Within minutes of stepping inside, our downstairs neighbor began blasting music so loud that the floors in our unit were shaking. At first, I thought maybe it was a one-off thing, like maybe she was celebrating or just having a rough day. But the music didn't stop. It went on for hours, carrying late into the night and even spilling over into the next day. It was so intense that the assistant manager came by to check it out for themselves. They could hear and feel it too. Calls and emails to her went completely ignored, and the only time the noise actually stopped was when we called the non-emergency line. That should have been my first clue that this wasn't going to be a quick or easy fix. Since then, it's been happening daily. I work from home, which makes it so much worse because I don't get a break from it. I can hear it through headphones, through earplugs, even when I try to distract myself. The vibrations are the worst part. They roll through the floor and up through my desk. At one point, I even bought a thick desk mat to try and dampen it, but it made no difference. Between her bass and the natural rattle of our old AC unit, which we can't shut off in the Texas heat, I've been stuck in this constant state of sensory overload. And it's not just annoying. The vibrations actually make me feel sick. Imagine trying to work while your floor shakes under you. The walls thrum like they're alive, and you can't escape it even if you block out the sound. That's what it's like every single day. We've kept track of everything too. We've got proof, recordings, video from our Ring camera. Even a Walmart delivery driver commented on how insanely loud it was when they dropped off groceries. We've complained to the office daily. The best they've offered is moving us to another unit in the same building. But honestly, why should we have to move when we're the ones following the lease rules? She's the one breaking them. Yesterday was the worst it's ever been. From 5 p.m. to 10 p.m., it was nonstop. We called non-emergency twice. At one point, she actually left to dodge the cops, then came back and slammed her door so hard, it knocked a picture off our wall and broke the frame. Her music blasts during office hours too, right across the street from the management office. She only ever shuts it off if she spots staff walking over. And the crazy part? There's even an on-site security officer here, but somehow nothing is being done. We've started house hunting because this is no way to live, but we don't want to rush into a purchase just because of one neighbor. Moving in with family isn't an option either. So for now we're just stuck. I'm exhausted, frustrated, and honestly confused about how someone can get away with this without a single lease violation. For context, I'm 33. My fiancé is 30. We're not loud people. He games occasionally with friends, maybe once or twice a week, and I'm usually quiet during work hours since I work from home. I don't even start making noise until late in the afternoon when I'm cooking dinner or cleaning. This whole thing has made me realize just how much one neighbor can completely throw off the peace of a home. That's where the story ends. It's crazy how quickly one bad neighbor can turn what should have been an exciting new chapter into something exhausting. The whole door slamming so hard a picture falls off part really says it all. Sometimes it feels like apartment living is just rolling the dice on who ends up around you. I think anyone who's been through it knows how draining it can get when the walls and floors don't protect you from the chaos. This next story is about someone who thought they were using the bathroom normally, only to realize way too late that they were hogging the only stall in a bar, while someone else desperately waited outside. Last night, my friend Ifa came up from Dublin to cheer me up. She stayed in the spare room, and we decided to hit a few bars together. By the time we made our way to the lodge, it was already around 4 in the morning. That place has just one cubicle big enough for me to fit in with my walking stick, so that's where I headed when nature called. At this point, I needed to pee badly, like uncomfortably badly. I got Aoife settled in, made sure the guys nearby knew to leave her alone since she's stunning and gets hit on constantly, and then I made my way to the bathroom. I went in, shut the door, and finally started to relieve myself. Everything felt fine at first. I've got some nerve damage, so I usually listen to the sound of myself peeing as the way to know when I'm finished. A couple of minutes into it though, someone started pounding on the door. They were desperate, yelling that they had awful diarrhea and needed me to hurry up. I shouted back that I was almost done, but I didn't want to cut things short. I thought I still had more to go. 5 minutes later, I was still standing there. At about the 10-minute mark, it hit me. Something wasn't right. I remember thinking, there's no way I've been peeing this long. This is inhuman. That's when I realized the horrifying truth. The sound I'd been relying on wasn't me peeing at all. It was the toilet itself making noise. I froze, piecing it all together. For who knows how long, I hadn't actually been peeing. I had just been standing there in the only bathroom stall, convinced everything was fine, while this poor person outside was clenching and begging to be let in. Finally, I forced myself to stop, slammed my knees together, and confirmed that the noise kept going. That toilet betrayed me. It was the one making the sound the whole time. I opened the door as quickly as I could, muttered a rushed apology, but the woman didn't even seem to hear me. She sprinted past me into the stall with a kind of urgent waddle that leaves no doubt about what's about to happen. I didn't stick around to see how it ended. Honestly, I think she made the mistake of trying those sketchy tuna sandwiches from the Maxall station up the road. Looking back, I can only laugh at the absurdity of it. Between my neurodamage, which makes me rely on sound cues, and the cursed toilet making those noises, it was like the perfect storm for one of the most awkward bathroom fails of my life. That story wraps up here. That one is both funny and brutal at the same time. Standing there for 10 minutes thinking everything was fine while chaos was building outside, that's a tough spot. The toilet making fake noises almost feels like it set the whole thing up. Honestly, the mental image of someone sprinting past without a word makes it even more awkward. This next story is about someone who accidentally got mistaken for staff at a historic event and ended up with free admission and perks they never expected. This happened more than 10 years ago, but it's one of those memories that still sticks with me. There's a place called Mount Vernon, George Washington's old estate, and every year they put on this holiday event called Christmas by Candlelight. The whole place gets decorated the way it would have looked back in Washington's time. Instead of electric lights, everything is glowing with candles and lanterns, and it gives the place this warm, timeless feel. Now, the event isn't free. Normally you need a ticket, and they sell out quickly. Sometimes you can get lucky with last-minute openings, but you can't really count on it. That year I was working nearby and thought, why not swing by after work and at least try to get in? I didn't have high hopes, but it was worth a shot. I didn't even think about the fact that I was still wearing my work badge on a lanyard around my neck. It wasn't anything fancy, just a standard ID badge with a photo and the company logo. But as I walked up to the entrance, something unexpected happened. The person at admission waved me through without even asking for a ticket. No hesitation, no questions, just a simple nod as if everything was in order. At first I was confused, but figured maybe I got lucky with a mix-up. Then I wandered over to the refreshments tent. They handed me a steaming cup of hot cider and, to my surprise, gave me a couple of extra cookies with a smile, like I was someone special. I remember standing there with my drink, looking around at the candlelit estate, wondering how I managed to slip in so easily. The night went on, and I ended up with a group touring the mansion. To make things even stranger, I got chosen to be the one who led the group into the house. They told me I'd be presenting our visitor credentials to Martha Washington, who was being played by one of the costumed actors. I didn't argue. I just went with it, playing along, even though I felt totally out of place. By the time the tour wrapped up, I was getting ready to leave and maybe grab a souvenir from the gift shop. But before I could head out, someone stopped me. They said, "Hey, we need you to go back and escort the next group." I froze for a second, completely caught off guard. I tried to explain, I don't actually work here. The person just looked at me, surprised, and pointed to the badge hanging around my neck. That's when it hit me. They thought I was staff the entire time. That badge made me look official enough to get free admission, free refreshments, extra cookies, and even a small role in the evening. In the end, I just laughed it off. I wasn't in period clothes, I definitely wasn't on the payroll, but thanks to a simple mistake, I got one of the most unique nights at Mount Vernon I could have asked for. That's the end of this story. That's actually pretty hilarious. Just walking in with a random badge and suddenly you're part of the event staff. That's some unplanned luck. The extra cookies were probably the best part though. It's funny how small details like a lanyard can change the whole way people see you. This next story is about a homeowner locked in a running battle with an ant colony, using a half-remembered family DIY trick that accidentally turned into an all-you-can-drink bar for insects. I grew up thinking jar lids and pantry supplies could solve just about anything. My dad had this classic summer ritual. He'd set out shallow lids with a mix of water and boric acid, tuck in a little square of sponge, and tell me we were outsmarting the scouts. It felt like campcraft more than pest control. He'd explain in that patient kitchen table way that the trick only worked if the ants carried it home. They need to think it's food, he'd say. Sugar makes the trip worth it. Somewhere between childhood and a creaky first apartment, I lost that last sentence. I remembered the lids. I remembered the boric acid. I even remembered the sponge cut to size so those tiny feet had a landing pad. But the sugar? For the longest time, I left it out. Part of me worried it would just invite an ant convention across the counters. Part of me thought the simpler mix still worked, just slower, like a gentle nudge instead of a hammer. So every summer, like clockwork, I'd refill the same lids and watch the ants belly up to the shallow rim, sip, sip, sipping, then wander off in neat little lines. I'd tell myself, after a week of refills, that the colony must be on its last legs. Any day now. Just needed a little more patience. To give you an idea of the scene, picture a quiet kitchen at the tail end of a warm day. The house hums softly. Fridge, a clock, some distant traffic. Then, almost like the air has a glitch, a line forms from a baseboard seam. Ants, single file, committing to a plan they clearly discussed in tiny board meetings. I'd set the jar lids down with the care of plating appetizers. The liquid would glint under the light, and the little sponge would swell, giving them this tidy bar top to lean on. I'd watch them arrive like regulars, hesitant at first, then comfortable, then bold. It became a routine I could run on autopilot. Refill, replace, wipe the counter, refill again. After a while, I started giving the whole thing a nickname in my head. Bartender duty. The crowd never got rowdy. They just kept coming. I convinced myself the boric acid alone was doing its slow, methodical work, like a strategy game that takes turns days apart. The thing about routines is they can make nonsense feel normal. When the lids went dry, I filled them again without thinking. When the line shifted to a second counter, I added a second lid like a bar expansion. I told myself it was containment. Looking back on it now, it was customer service. Then last night, the ants picked up the tempo. 2 counters. A handful of scouts turned into a small parade, and my comfortable little fiction snapped a bit. After a while, I heard my dad's voice from years ago. Sugar makes the trip worth it. And I finally stopped arguing with common sense. I made a tiny syrup, stirred it into the boric acid and water mix, and set new lids like I should have been doing the whole time. It took 5 minutes, maybe less. I wiped down the trails, turned off the kitchen light, and told myself I'd check in the morning. Morning hit like a page flip. The counters were quiet. The little seams by the baseboards were empty. No moving specks, no choreography. The jar lids sat there like evidence of a magic trick I couldn't recreate. It wasn't just fewer ants. It was none. The line, the bar, the tiny regulars, gone. I stood there with a sponge in my hand and realized what I'd been doing all this time. I hadn't been starving a colony. I'd been hydrating it. I was the friendly neighborhood tap, serving a strange bitter tonic with no reason to haul it home. I kept thinking about quinine, that tonic water bite. Maybe the boric mix without sugar tasted weird but interesting, like a novelty drink. Maybe the ants were coming for the ambiance. The reliable puddle, the non-stick landing pad, the piece of a low, bright kitchen at midnight. I pictured myself polishing the lids like barware and flipping the little sponge like a coaster. It would be funny if it hadn't been so, effective once I finally did it right. There was this tiny ache in my chest that surprised me. Not guilt exactly, but a tug. After a while, even pests feel like characters in the same book. I could recognize the exact spot where the line appeared each evening. I knew their tempo after rain. I learned how the trail paused when the fridge kicked on, like they were listening. And then, in one night, the story ended. The kitchen felt still. Cleaner, sure, but also a little emptier. To be clear, ants in the house are not cute when they reach the bread or decide the fruit bowl is a theme park. I'm not pretending we signed a treaty. At the same time, I guess I'd spent weeks humanizing them by accident, turning a problem into a ritual, then into a habit, then into a role. Bartender, host, night manager of the world's smallest lounge. And with a spoonful of sugar, I promoted myself to something less poetic, efficient, final. The part of me that loves tidy solutions liked that. The part that reads too much into everything missed the tiny footsteps. After a while, I rinsed the lids, wiped the counters one more time, and put the boric acid away. I told myself I'd remember the full recipe next time before the parade marched in. If there is a next time, I'll do it quick and clean. No more bar hours. No more refills for the regulars. I can still hear my dad's voice explaining the why of it, not just the how. They have to carry it back, he'd say. Otherwise, you're just feeding the line. By late afternoon, the kitchen had settled back into plain old kitchen sounds. Spoon in a mug, tap dripping once, the low purr of the fridge. I made coffee and stared at the baseboards a little too long, waiting for emotion that never came. The counters felt bigger without that tiny highway. The silence felt earned, part victory, part eulogy. That's pest control, I guess. A quiet house versus a quiet conscience, and a spoonful of science deciding which one wins. That story wraps up here. There's something oddly relatable about turning a hassle into a routine and then realizing the routine was the problem. The bartender image is funny in a gentle way, like a sitcom joke that sneaks up and lands late. Precision beats patience sometimes, and this is one of those times. The quiet kitchen at the end almost steals the scene more than the ants ever did. This next story is about a man who discovered his new girlfriend was a witch, leading to one of the most unusual dating experiences he'd ever had. When I first started dating this girl, everything seemed pretty normal. She was fun, kind, and we got along really well. For one of our dates, I picked her up so we could see a movie at the IMAX theater. We were driving over, making small talk, when she suddenly said, "I have something to tell you." I figured it was going to be something simple, maybe about her job or her family. But instead, she looked straight at me and said, "I'm a witch." At first I thought she was joking, so I gave a quick response. I laughed and said, "No worries, everyone gets a little witchy now and then." She shook her head and told me I misunderstood. She wasn't joking at all. She explained that she was originally from Louisiana, and that not only was she a witch, but so were her mother and grandmother. I had no experience with anything like this, so my head was buzzing with questions. Instead of going to the movie, she asked if I wanted to just come back to her apartment so she could explain things better. I agreed, since I was curious and honestly wanted to know more. Up until that point, we had always hung out at my place. She'd come over and play with my black cat, Velcro, who I jokingly called Velcro the Wonder Cat. This was the first time she actually invited me into her space. The moment I stepped inside, it felt different. Right by the door, leaning against the wall, was a broom that looked like it came out of a movie set. The handle had strange symbols burned into the wood, like something meant for ritual use. Then in the living room, she had a small table set up like an altar. On top of it were items I didn't recognize. Candles, jars, maybe some herbs. And right above it hung several large pictures of Jesus. The mix of spiritual objects was surprising, but she explained that her beliefs weren't what most people assumed. She started telling me about Wicca, and how it wasn't tied to anything dark or connected to Satan, like movies or old stereotypes make people think. It was more about energy, respect, and balance. After she explained, she got very direct and asked me if I still wanted to keep seeing her, now that I knew. I told her yes, because at that point I really did like her and didn't see a reason not to. Things progressed that night. We started getting intimate, and before long, clothes were scattered all over her bedroom. In the moment, everything was exciting and fun, until I asked her to turn over. When she did, I suddenly froze. Covering her back was a massive tattoo of Jesus. It wasn't a small design either. It took up a huge portion of her back. My reaction was immediate. I asked her to turn back over. She was confused and asked me why, and I had to be honest. I said, "I really don't want Jesus watching what I'm trying to do here." It already felt like he was watching from the altar in the other room, and now there he was staring from her back. It was just too much for me in the moment. Despite that awkward night, we kept seeing each other for a while. Things were good between us overall, but eventually our schedules started clashing too much. I worked late into the night, sometimes until 3 or 4 in the morning, while she was a nurse and had a much stricter routine. It became hard to line things up, and she was the one who decided to end the relationship. There was one last detail, though. She had always loved my cat, Velcro. Since witches and black cats are basically iconic together, I gave Velcro to her when things ended. It felt fitting somehow, like the cat was meant to be with her. That's the end of this story. That story definitely had a mix of humor and surprise packed into it. The tattoo moment feels like something straight out of a comedy movie. The way it ended with the cat actually kind of tied the whole thing together in a weirdly perfect way. It's one of those stories that just sticks in your head for how unusual it all is. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for today's stories. Hopefully it made for a nice, easy listen. If you had a good time, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Thanks for spending some time here, and I'll catch you in the next one.